Catherine, I'm going to take that as my cue to start proceedings. Just get a text message. Off you go, Mike. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our audio description on TV. It's fantastic to have you all here. My name's Mike Kent. I'm one of the researchers on the project, along with Tama Lever, Katie Ellis, and the ever capable Catherine Locke. This is sort of the welcome address. I'm sitting in my office. There's a bookcase behind me. I'm a middle-aged man wearing a white collared shirt and some ridiculously large black-rimmed glasses. As I mentioned earlier, I have this new camera on my computer, so I'm sort of staring up. I feel like this lead singer to Oasis, always singing up into the microphone, just to set the scene for you a little bit. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting has been hosted here at Curtin University and we are on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. But given the diffuse nature of this, I'd also like to pay my respects to Indigenous owners all across Australia, where we are all individually located and where our messages are transitioning. This is part of our audio description ARC funded project. This is the second symposium, and it's a bit more convenient for everyone because it's all online rather than people flying to Perth and things like that, although it was great to see all the people at our last symposium. Today we're going to have two presentations before a bit of a question and answer session, then a brief break for a second session, which will start at approximately 12:20 Eastern Standard Time. It's always good to have not the summer time, so only 2 hours rather than 3 hours out from the rest of the country, which is very exciting for us here in Perth. While people are presenting, can I ask that people keep your cameras and microphones off, just to preserve a bit of bandwidth for those of us who might be a bit more marginal in terms of our connection. Questions ideally can be asked in a Q&A box, or if you like, you can sort of raise your virtual hand if you'd like to ask a question verbally. Red Bee Media are kindly providing captioning for the event, so thank you to them. So I won't take too much more time on us. I'd like to introduce Lauren Henley. Lauren's a disability advocate and policy expert, more than 15 years experience in advancing the rights of people with disability. After losing her sight in a car accident in 2006, Lauren has dedicated her career to systemic advocacy, holding key roles in Blind Citizens Australia, the Australian Human Rights Commission, and currently serving as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Assistive Technology Suppliers Australia. In 2015, Lauren lodged a landmark complaint with the United Nations over Australia's failure to mandate audio description on Australian television, and that case culminated in a finding of a human rights breach and prompted federal action. So thank you on behalf of everyone for all your work, but that particular case, Lauren, was quite famous and really helped move the dial. So thank you for that. And without ado, I'll pass on to you.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Mike. And I'd also just like to thank you for getting us started with a fabulous audio description to set the scene. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk to all of you today. I know that I'm amongst academics, audio describers, disability advocates, and representatives from television networks. And I'm really thrilled to be able to come and speak about an issue that's not only shaped my personal advocacy journey, but continues to impact the lives of thousands of Australians who are blind or vision impaired. Today, I'm going to talk to you about audio description on Australian television, where we've come from, where we are now, and where we must go in order to realise a truly inclusive media landscape. Firstly, though, I'd like to take the time to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we are all joining this symposium from today. I'm joining you from Awabakal country in Newcastle, New South Wales, which was, is, and always will be Aboriginal lands. Audio description is a topic that is very close to my heart and something I have a long-standing history with. For people who are blind or vision impaired, audio description is a critical access tool. It's the difference between passively listening to the background noise and actively engaging with the rich visual storytelling that television offers. It allows us to experience the emotional nuance of a scene, to follow a plotline with clarity, and to participate in cultural conversations in the same way sighted people do. I can still remember the first time I experienced audio description on television during a pilot broadcast on the ABC. It was a David Attenborough documentary, and I remember thinking, what a waste of audio described content. Documentaries are easy enough to follow without audio description, and how wrong I was. You really have no idea how much you're missing until you finally have access to the full picture. With the added narration, that documentary came to life in an entirely new way for me. For the first time since losing my sight, I could form vivid mental images of what was happening on screen. I could understand not just what was being said, but what was being shown, and that changed everything. As someone who still has visual memory, audio description has a way of lighting up my visual cortex and conjuring up an image in my mind's eye. More importantly, though, it's a bridge between exclusion and inclusion for people who are blind or vision impaired. And it's important to understand that the benefits of audio description also extend far beyond just the blind and vision impaired community. Audio description also supports people with cognitive and learning disabilities, people with autism, elderly viewers with declining vision, and people who are processing information and content in a second language. It enhances clarity, supports literacy, and deepens engagement with visual storytelling. It's also a valuable tool in educational settings, helping students of all abilities to understand complex visual material. And it contributes to the growing field of inclusive design, where products and services are created to be usable by as many people as possible. In short, audio description makes television better for everyone. When we make media more accessible, we make it more inclusive, more innovative, and more human. Unfortunately, though, Australia has historically failed to keep pace with other developed nations when it comes to the provision of audio description on television. In countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, audio description has been available on television for several decades and is mandated by law. I had the opportunity to travel to South Korea last year, and guess what? South Korea has actually had audio description on television since 2006, so we're a long way behind. By contrast, Australia's really just started to scratch the surface in recent times. So in Australia, television programming is regulated under a piece of legislation called the Broadcasting Services Act. Minimum targets for captioning for people who are deaf or hearing impaired have now been mandated under this act for more than 20 years. And the amount of captioned content available has continued to increase over time, while people who are blind or vision impaired have continued to go without any access whatsoever. After years of campaigning and 2 audio description trials on the ABC, audio description services were finally introduced on the ABC and SBS several years ago. However, these services are still not mandated across the wider broadcasting sector. The commercial networks are still not obligated to provide any audio description at all, which leaves huge gaps in access. Now, let's think about what that means in real terms. Imagine not being able to follow the coverage of the Olympics, a national election debate, or even just your favorite weekly drama series. It's not just about entertainment, it's about being excluded from the national dialogue. And that's why access to television is explicitly referenced under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The convention is an international agreement that aims to protect the rights and dignity of people with disability. Countries that sign and agree to the convention, like Australia has, are committing to respect and uphold these rights, ensuring people with disability can participate in all areas of life on an equal basis with others. Article 30 of the Convention refers to participation in cultural life, recreation, leisure, and sport. It requires countries that have signed and ratified the Convention to ensure people with disability enjoy access to television programs, films, theatre, and other cultural activities in accessible formats. As a community, we've exhausted every option that was available to us to see this issue resolved within Australia. And that included direct engagement with broadcasters, lodging strategic complaints under the Disability Discrimination Act, and convening industry roundtables and working groups. Nothing had worked. There was, however, one avenue outside Australia we had not yet explored. I've already spoken about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but the Australian government has also signed a secondary agreement, which is what's called the optional protocol to the convention. That agreement allows people with disability or their advocates to complain directly to a United Nations committee called the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities if they believe their rights under the convention have been violated and they have already exhausted all available options that exist to remedy the situation at a domestic level. This committee can then investigate the case and make recommendations to the country involved. So back in 2018, I lodged a complaint under the optional protocol alleging that the Australian government had breached my rights by failing to legislate to introduce minimum targets for audio description on television. I have to stress here that while my name was on that complaint, it was very much a team effort, and I absolutely didn't do it on my own. I had support from the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, now known as the Justice and Equity Centre, who provided me with free legal support and representation. Blind Citizens Australia also provided a written testimony to support my complaints, as well as extensive peer support along the way. I also had support from Vision Australia and from a range of individuals across the blind community who offered me invaluable guidance when it came to drafting my complaints and navigating the various communications with the committee that was investigating it. Something quite interesting happened after the Australian government had received a copy of my complaints. Suddenly, they announced that they would provide funding to our two public broadcasters, the ABC and SBS, to enable them to provide 14 hours of audio-described content per week. They then wrote to me via the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to ask whether this new commitment would resolve my complaints, and my answer was no. This new commitment was much celebrated by the blind and vision impaired community, and it was definitely a huge step in the right direction, but it didn't resolve my complaint for a range of reasons. Firstly, the funding that was provided was time limited. There was no commitment to permanence and ongoing funding, which meant that we could easily lose it in the next budget cycle. Next, public broadcasters were only required to deliver 14 hours of audio-described content per week, with no plan to increase this over time. And finally, the announcement only affected public broadcasters and did nothing to hold commercial television networks accountable. That was my take on it, but the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities had to interpret the case for themselves. The process was not a quick one. It took 4 years for the complaint to be fully considered, but in 2022, the committee found in my favour. They ruled that Australia had indeed violated my rights under the convention, and they issued a strong recommendation that the Australian government take all necessary legislative and policy steps to ensure that audio description is widely and permanently available on Australian television. This decision was more than a personal victory. It was a powerful international acknowledgement of the fact that access to media is a human right, not an optional extra. In response to my complaint, the Australian government has now committed to increasing audio description on Australia's two publicly funded television networks, the ABC and SBS. They've also committed to working with commercial broadcasters and subscription television providers on a framework and timetable to improve the provision of audio description. And finally, they have committed to developing an associated plan underneath Australia's disability strategy to improve access to information, including through audio description. We've met with Australia's Minister for Communications 3 times since these commitments were made, and we've definitely seen progress on all 3 of these commitments. But as we know, the wheels of government always move more slowly than we'd like. What I can report, though, is that last year, then Communications Minister Michelle Rowland clearly stated her intention to introduce legislative amendments to mandate minimum targets for audio description on TV. This commitment was never actually made in response to my complaint, but it's what we've ultimately been pushing for all along. Now, I want to reinforce here that the interest in this issue has very much sat with Michelle Rowland. So if we'd had a change in government, all of the commitments I've just spoken about could have been lost, and we would have been starting from scratch. We've been given another chance, though. We don't know who will hold the communications portfolio in Albanese's new ministry. My understanding is that this will all be signed off on today with an announcement expected on either Sunday or Monday. Even if we don't welcome Michelle Rowland back to that role, though, she has paved the way for our sector to continue its advocacy on this issue with a light ahead of the tunnel and a promise of change ahead. I'd like to remind everyone present that this is not an unrealistic dream. Other countries have already shown what's possible. What we need now is the political will, industry collaboration, and sustained advocacy to bring this vision to life in Australia. To an extent, the political will is there. Industry collaboration is also coming to fruition, as evidenced by the organisation of this symposium. Sustained advocacy appears to have fallen by the wayside, though. I no longer work in a role where I have any control over this. I'm making a public appeal to the organisations who represent and serve us, though, as people who are blind or vision impaired. We've been advocating for audio description on television for around 25 years now. We are so close to the finish line, and now is not the time to give up. Now is the time to come to the fight with renewed vigour and a sustained effort that will see this through to the end. I know how exhausting the fight can be, trust me, but we never achieve systemic change overnight. It often takes years, and it requires a sustained effort to see an issue through to the end. So let's stand together and get the job done. The fight for audio description has never just been about television. It's about equity, it's about visibility, and it's about the right to participate in our shared cultural life on equal terms. Looking ahead, the vision is clear. We want a future where legislation mandates minimum audio description quotas across all networks, not just our public ones. We want standards and training to be developed to ensure consistency and quality across providers. We want to ensure that consultation with the community is built into every step of policy design, implementation, and review. And perhaps most importantly, we want a cultural shift, one where accessibility is embedded into the DNA of media production and not added as an afterthought. To everyone in this room, virtual room, whether you're a broadcaster, an academic, an advocate, or an audio describer, I urge you to keep pushing for change. Ask questions, start conversations, build partnerships, and use your platforms to amplify the message that access does matter. Because until television is accessible to all Australians, it isn't truly public. And until audio description is universal, our stories will remain incomplete. You might not need audio description right now, but I often say that there are two groups of people in the world: those who have a disability already and those who don't have one yet. But we know that age-related vision loss is still the leading cause of blindness in this country. So eventually, you, a friend, or a family member may suddenly need audio description just like I do. And wouldn't it be nice if that service already existed? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. For some reason, I've just started talking because I turned my video on, but of course I didn't turn my sound on yet. So thank you very much, and very interesting stuff. Breaking news from Michelle Rowland as well. So that's exciting to hear. Our next speakers, Michelle Chu and Gerry Neustatl. I'd just like to introduce them, if that's okay. Michelle Chu is the Senior Inclusive Design Specialist at the ABC. Michelle is a passionate advocate in accessibility and inclusive design. There's over 7 years' experience as a Senior Inclusive Design Specialist at ABC, which is an awesome title. She's been instrumental in introducing audio description to the ABC iView platform since 2021. Through working closely with the project team, she's been a key player in researching and implementing audio description, ensuring that AD is not only available, but also easy to find and watch on ABC iView. So thank you for all that work, Michelle. Gerry Neustatl is the lead accessibility specialist at the ABC. He drives access to all the news and current affairs, lifestyle and entertainment on websites like the ABC News, ABC iView, and ABC Listen. I was going to say one of your focuses right now is developing accessibility for the forthcoming federal election, but I imagine that's not a focus. It's probably a deep relief that you're on the other side of that, Gerry. And alongside that, the ABC Classic 100 voting experience. Joe's a passionate advocate for media accessibility and led the national launch of audio description on Australian TV screens in 2020. Worked closely with his colleague Michelle on its extension to iView in 2023. So thank you both very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mike. I'm just going to go through the processes of sharing my screen, if I can remember how to do this. No, I didn't do what I wanted to there at all. So just one sec, I'll try it again. It's so amazing working with these wonderful technologies. They change all the time. Okay, just confirming that you can see my screen and everything okay.
Yep.
All good.
Yeah. Excellent. Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Lauren, that was a beautiful talk. There is so much that I took out of that. And there are things that we're going to refer back to today. So things that I can probably skim over a little bit as we go as well. So you've saved me a little bit of time on my presentation. Thanks also, Mike, for that lovely introduction. So today, Michelle and I are going to walk you through the history of audio description at the ABC. We're going to look at some examples, some successes and challenges, where we are today, and some opportunities for tomorrow. The ABC celebrated its 90th birthday in 2022. And that means 90 years of bringing television to all Australians. That is, unless you're deaf or hard of hearing or blind, have low vision. Advocacy groups for Australians who are blind or have low vision have wanted audio descriptions for decades, as Lauren mentioned. But the history goes back much further than that. According to the National Institute for the Blind's journal, The Beacon, in January 1917, a lady, Eleanor Waterlow, helped blind soldiers of St Dunstan's Home for the Blind in Brighton, East Sussex, in the UK, visualise entertainments that appeal only to the sight, creating mental pictures by flashes of suggestive description interjected at appropriate moments. Audio description was progressively introduced through the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe, but still not Australia. As Lauren mentioned, on-screen captions for audiences who are deaf or hard of hearing were introduced to Australian television in 1982 and legislated into the Broadcast Services Act of 1998. But on-screen content remained hidden from audiences who are blind or have low vision, unless they have a friend or family member to explain what was going on screen. In 2011, the ABC conducted the first trial of audio descriptions on broadcast TV for the federal government, again, as Lauren mentioned. We did another one for video on demand in 2015. And then in December 2019, we got the go-ahead and funding to audio describe 14 hours a week of broadcast TV. I won't mention anything more about that because Lauren already has. That's great. So what do audiences want of their audio description service? Advocacy groups have been so passionate for decades, and we wanted to deliver an outstanding service. We joined forces with SBS to understand audiences' wants and needs, like what shows and genres to audio describe, how to promote what's on, and when to signpost audio described content. We engaged the Centre for Inclusive Design to help with this research project, and they brought a robust knowledge bank of experts to the team from advocacy groups, from Curtin University, from ACAN, and from a number of institutes. Audiences prioritised the visually rich genres of documentaries, dramas, and children's content over news, game shows, and comedy. So we started with shows like Beautiful Gardening Australia, stunning documentaries like Australia Remastered, dramas like Mystery Road, and of course the ever popular Bluey. Our first audio described shows went to air in June 2020, and this promotion started with a chime that signals when a show's audio described. And we share that with SBS for consistency. So I'm just going to play that for you now.
Audio descriptions are now available for people with impaired vision. They explain the visual elements on the screen.
A bird perches on a fountain. A cat watches a butterfly flap.
And are available on a range of shows across ABC TV.
They relax in the lounge. Dad lifts a leg.
Oh, Bluey!
Now everyone can get a complete picture. For more information, go to help.abc.net.au or call 139994.
But what do ABC's audio descriptions sound like? One of the first shows that we audio described was a documentary series called Australia Remastered. It's visually rich, and there's plenty of space in the audio to insert descriptive audio description. In this example, we show the opening scenes and Aaron's narration, then blur the screen back and introduce the audio description track before returning to the visuals.
The ABC has introduced audio description to some of its programs. Now for a scene from Australia Remastered, presented by Aaron Pedersen.
Imagine a land lost in time and space. A world where nothing is guaranteed.
Rain soaks a koala, red flames surge through bushland, a long-nosed echidna trundles over sticks.
And everything is possible.
A crocodile rears up and snaps a cricket from a branch. A platypus flicks its bill and dives.
What kind of life could survive in such a place?
Budgies swarm, orcas dive, cockatoos fight.
For almost 50 years, the ABC has documented the lives of Australia's incredible wildlife,
Crocodiles clash.
capturing astonishing tales of survival
Kangaroos wrestle.
that in many cases had never been filmed before and have never been filmed since.
An eagle grabs a fish.
In this series, we bring these rarely seen moments back to life,
A striped numbat yawns.
using digitally remastered footage and the latest science.
A baby wombat grips fur. A lyrebird lowers its feathers over its head. A goanna digs out a scorpion and shakes it. A python swarms up a tree.
At a time in history when much of our wildlife is under threat, this is a chance to come eye to eye with the animals that make Australia unlike anywhere else.
ABC's audio description service. For more information, visit help.abc.net.au or call 139994.
How do audiences want to learn about upcoming shows in the broadcast schedule? Audiences told us they wanted emails and a web schedule. So we spoke to our friends at Vision Australia and we sent them fortnightly updates to send to their members by email and DaisyBook, and made an accessible audio description schedule showing what's on this week and what's on next week. And while asked to deliver 14 hours per week, as Lauren mentioned, the ABC chose to deliver as much as we could within budgetary constraints, and that was considerably more than the minimum requirement. But what did audiences think of our audio description? We had really good feedback, like the audio description makes it, sorry, I can't actually see that. The audio description makes it so much easier for me to know what's going on. And I hope you expand it to a lot more programs. But something that audiences said to us resoundingly is that they want audio description when they want to watch it, not when it's just available to them in the schedule. They want to be unlocked from the broadcast TV schedule. So we needed to answer some questions before designing an audio-described video on demand experience, like what devices do audiences want to watch audio description shows on? How do audiences want to search and browse the catalogue? And how do audiences want to play shows and interact with the player? So again, we joined forces with our friends at SBS and asked audiences to help us design their audio-described video on demand experience. So I'll now hand over to Michelle to walk us through what that was like.
Thank you, Gerry. So as mentioned by Gerry, we engaged with Centre for Inclusive Design, CFID, back in November 2021 to simply understand better. We want to know what are the AD best practice, desired features, general user flow, and which device to prioritize for our rollout. To begin with, research syntheses were completed by Curtin University to understand what we already know about AD uses and AD implementations. Then CFID did an analysis on different AD video on-demand providers like Netflix and Disney Plus, and see how they handle the AD functionality. From there, we did some user interviews with 15 community members who are blind, low vision, autistics, or have sensory disabilities to understand how they currently use AD, what devices are most used or preferred. From the interviews, one of the key insights that surfaced out was that AD is useless if the apps or website itself isn't accessible. And because of that, it's crucial for us to find out whether there's any major blocker that we need to resolve before development starts. So CFID ran the usability testing on the current ABC iView apps and websites with 7 blind and low vision users to identify any major blockers, and really just to confirm the expectation of AD on ABC iView. Can they get there? Can they play there? Can they stay there? Which is the main guiding principle that we use for the rest of our research. Well, some issues, accessibility issues were found. None of them were any major blockers or something that we can't fix, which is good news. Next slide. So with all the rich insights and recommendations we have in hand, we immediately got to work. So after that, in March 2022, we begin by cleaning up some of our design on mobile apps. And during that, we also resolved a good chunk of some of the accessibility bugs we have within the iView apps from previous usability testing or existing in our backlog. Then in June, we completed our 6 weeks technical proof of concept for iOS. It is a build to learn activities just to make sure the front end and back end all match up so that you can actually find a track within the iView that actually works. And to be truly inclusive, we also consulted with people who weren't familiar with AD or currently don't use AD. So we did in our round of testing, and the result is that we included more information like frequently asked questions, information about AD within the iView, so that for people who don't know what AD is, they can find out more about it. Then by November, still in 2022, we kick off development for the mobile apps for iOS, Android, and also with the ability to AirPlay and Chromecast, because we understand large screen is also preferred as well. Next slide. Thank you. Now we are hitting 2023. That's like 2 years ago. Yeah, January. We are 3 months into development and getting quite close to launch. We want to make sure that all Australians can actually independently access, discover, and play audio described shows on iView. But the thing is, previous research that was done, it was based on other competitors and purely focused on the usability of the iView apps. We want to combine iView and AD together and put it into the hands of users. So during the interviews, participants were asked to find shows with AD available. In the first couple of rounds of interview, none of the participants could actually find the AD collection or list. Why is that, you ask? It wasn't because it wasn't there. It was just because people didn't expect to find them in program A to Z. Well, that makes sense because the title literally says nothing about AD. even though that was one of the recommended entry point from previous research. So what did we do to fix that? We know that search is usually the last resort for people who, if they can't find what they need. So we included a search filter within the search screen so that they can easily filter out non-AD shows. We also discovered that a couple of participants did try to search AD by typing it in the keyword in search. So make sure that if they're typing audio description or AD within search, they can filter out the same results as well. We actually used some of the, in the next round of interview that we did, we used some of the changes we did, and then it works really well for the rest of the participants. We also started promoting and educating users to go to program A to Z for AD collections so that they're aware where to go to find it. In longer terms, we are exploring ways to create a dedicated AD category for content, which currently is not possible until we've rolled out AD on other platforms like smart TV and web. This will really allow users to truly discover shows with AD rather than finding a particular show with AD and check whether they have AD on or not. Next slide. Then we are hitting May, June 2023. That's when we launched audio description. That still takes quite some while before we can actually launch it. But you know, the job is never done. So very soon after launch in June, I think, we started receiving some feedbacks about the volume of AD track being quite soft, which makes it really hard to hear, especially when there's a lot of overlapping noises or music in the background. And another thing is in broadcast, these tracks are separated, which means that user can adjust that AD volume separately with the remote. But in iView, what we've offered in the app is pre-mixed, which means that user can't adjust the track volume at all, separately at all. So what we did is we fixed that. AD is now a lot more balanced. And what it will do is whenever the audio describer is narrating, the original audio volume track will then be lowered down or ducked down. So people can still hear the narration clearly, yet without compromising that original track volume to provide context and the environment and the vibes, I guess. I'm going to get Gerry to press play to show you what it's like before on the episode called Clever Man.
Come on, Skins! Right, yeah, stay on it. Where you going, Brass? Where you going?
In a basketball football cross, Harry leaps, somersaults and scores, dodges.
Whoa! Yeah! Good one!
Malian watches.
Right, boys, let's get set for two.
Collier shoulders Jake.
Ah!
So I hope that the captioner didn't have too much trouble actually captioning this part of it. As you can, I guess, hear, it's actually quite difficult to even figure out the narration because there's just so much noise going on. Now, the second video I'll get Gerry to play is what happened after our audio technician have kind of applied that magic of auto ducking whenever AD narration is happening. Play.
Right, yeah, stay on it. Where you going, Brass? Where you going?
In a basketball football cross, Harry leaps, somersaults and scores, Gub dodges the hard throw.
Whoa! Yeah! Good one!
Malian watches.
Right, boys, let's get set for two.
Collier shoulders Jake.
Ah!
It was much better, isn't it? It's just much clearer that you can, instead of trying to focus on what audio the describer is saying, you can actually just immerse yourself into enjoying the whole show. Now imagine you have to listen to that, like the before mixing version for a whole episode, which kind of defeats the point of listening to audio description, just to be immersed in that whole experience. Next. Then we are hitting 2024. About 6 months after launch, early 2024, we want to check in with our audience. How are they using? How they going with AD? Are they enjoying it? Are there any bugs that they found? Do they want AD on other platforms like smart TVs and websites? So we ran a survey and we received about 310 responses. And here's what we found. 75% of respondents said that they're satisfied or very satisfied with AD on iView. While many of them are happy with AD being available on mobile and tablets, there is a strong express preferences of 42% wanting to watch AD, do currently watch AD on smart TV. Why is that? Smart TV are preferred because they're larger screen, they're easy to see. It also allows people to watch it with the family and friends, kind of in a communal settings. And overall, it's just a much more comfortable viewing experience and setup with your couch and your speakers just lying there and listen to audio description. And quote sets. We need a large screen to see the picture, so a TV works for us. The smaller screen, we will struggle to see. Next. But on top of that, we also discovered that the script of most AD shows weren't really capturing the nuances of what's happening. This, alongside with the limited availability of AD supported shows, do leave audience frustrated. Quote sets, I find the writing of AD a bit sparse on details. This limits to the extent which I can appreciate a piece of media, because all but the most essential details are still out of reach, making programs lack some of the colors it has for sighted viewers. Another quote also says, some shows have very little AD and you forget it's even on. So further research and investigation is definitely needed to validate them. We also find that there's a general, as I mentioned at the start, there's a general lack of understanding of what AD actually is and the value that it brings. Most of the respondents that we actually did filter out at the very beginning of the survey did confuse this AD with closed caption. And for those who are actually interested with AD, they want to know more about it and try it out. Quote says, I didn't know AD was available. Sounds helpful now that vision deterioration has been rapidly getting worse over the past 1.5 years of having long COVID. I'm looking forward to trying it. So many shows now have scenes with messages on mobile phone screens that are way too small to see properly. There could be a potential market for older people, parents with kids, and audio users as well. Slide. So indeed, it has been a fairly long road, but we're still going. But it's much more than just a build and release, activities. But what's next for us, Gerry?
Thanks, Michelle. So what is next? First thing we're going to look at is discovery. We'll add audio description to more platforms, starting with smart TVs, according to the research findings that Michelle referred to, and we'll make the shows easier to find. Promotion. We'll spread the word so audiences know what audio description is, where it's available, where they can watch ABC TV or ABC iView, audio described. And what's next? How can we make our audio description best in class? Maybe by mainstreaming it for everyone, as Lauren mentioned, not only for audiences who are blind or have low vision. So imagine audio description that replaces the screen when people don't have it. You're driving up the coast. You want to listen to that foreign correspondent episode that you missed. You want to hear the latest Gardening Australia episode while gardening. Maybe you want to settle the kids to sleep with their favourite Bluey episode, but without a distracting screen. I'm going to play a couple of clips for you. The first one is the original audio from the show, Bluey show called Sleepy Time. Very nice. It's very lovely, but it wasn't very descriptive, was it? What was going on screen? What was happening? Let's try it with the audio description, and thank you very much to our friends at Red Bee for doing this audio description.
Bingo and Floppy fly to Neptune. They snuggle in its soft crust. The crust becomes a blanket. Bingo sleeps between Bluey and Dad. Asleep, Dad and Bluey pull the blanket, tossing Bingo around. In the dream, Bingo and Floppy roll on blue waves. Dad and Bluey pull at once. Bingo bounces. Jupiter. Bingo paws the surface. She slaps Dad's face. Bingo moves off, then charges at Jupiter. She kicks Dad in the tummy. Bingo runs along Jupiter and on Dad's back. Bluey joins Bingo on Jupiter. In bed, the sleeping puppies jog on Dad. The puppies bounce. Dad pushes Bluey off. In the dream, debris flies at Bluey. Bingo and Floppy jump into a crater.
So how rich was that? Who needs a screen when there's such descriptive narration going on to really open up our minds? It took 90 years, but we now have audio described ABC TV and iView, and we're very excited for the future of Australian audio description. To the many people and teams at ABC who helped with research and operations, product design and engineering, programming, delivery, audience support, marketing, promotions, government relations. Thank you also to our friends at SBS, Curtin University, ACAN, Blind Citizens Australia, Vision Australia, Guide Dogs New South Wales, Red Bee Media, and everyone else who contributed to this body of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our presenters, Lauren, Michelle and Gerry, not only for your presentations, but for all your hard work over the last 15, 20, 25 years. I don't think Michelle's been working that long. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. We have a couple of options. If you would like to ask your questions verbally, just raise your virtual hand. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a hand there. There's also a Q&A box, which is just next to the resources tab down the bottom, and you can type in your question and I can ask it for you.
Sorry, can I just dive in, because I know I've got God rights on this particular setup. I'm really curious from the ABC's perspective if the sort of listen along type option, so that the Bluey option in particular, is that being framed in any way as audio description? My sense of that having, I mean, I've used some of that with my kids, but it's never been positioned as sort of an offshoot of audio description. It doesn't feel like an entry point where you'd even think about audio description in other senses. It feels much more like it's evolving out of the audio book and the listen to music sort of space. I'm curious if those things can be joined up in a way that sort of emphasizes the continuing value of audio description.
Michelle, do you mind if I answer that one? I think that that's a really great suggestion. I'm so glad that it was raised. I agree. What we have with the listen along Bluey at the moment does not incorporate audio description at all, to the best of my knowledge. And that's something that Michelle and I have discussed. We are keen to see what possibilities exist moving forward. The suggestion that we proposed earlier might be a great way to see that realised. At this point, all I can ask is that people are as vocal as they can be to help us get this over the line, because we are 200% behind you.
Brilliant. I mean, it was really interesting as well. Think about, I think Lauren's point that, you know, people, especially as they get older, often will become people who are considered people with disability at some point. And I think it's almost like there's like a weird outlier now where there's a middle bit of your life where audio description isn't as helpful perhaps for some people, but it almost like feels like it looks like the norm rather than the outlier when you look at it through that perspective. So yeah, really great stuff that you're doing.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A box from the wonderful Will McRosty from Melbourne. He says he was curious if there was a set of production standards that guided the first iteration of AD on ABC TV, or was it the process devised from scratch?
It was a bit of both. We wanted to hit the ground running. We also wanted to do it in a way that was going to provide the best possible service for its intended audience. We also knew that we knew what we didn't know, and that's why we worked with SBS and the Centre for Inclusive Design. And very importantly, we worked as much as possible alongside and with both people who are blind or have low vision and advocacy groups, because as you'll hear time and time again, nothing about us without us. And this is a philosophy that we tried to take with us as much as possible with the launch of broadcast audio description. We tried to do the same thing as well, as I mentioned before, when we extended the service to video on demand. I hope that answers the question.
Well, Will, if it doesn't, feel free to get back in touch. I have another question from Jonathan Craig. Thanks for joining us today. He says, I think the promotion piece is quite important. I'm surprised by how many people who could benefit from AD don't know it exists. Those ads that accompanied the launch of AD on iView were great for raising that awareness amongst people who are in the blind or low vision community and the general public. Would it be possible to run another campaign like this? Also, important to think about the touch points for people who lose vision. Are people told about AD when they meet with service providers, clinicians, peer connection organisations? This might be a question for all three of you.
Who'd like to speak to this one?
Well, Lauren here, just to the last point, to my knowledge, audio description is really not something that is promoted to people. And I think when people first start engaging with service provision organisations and they're going through that experience of vision loss, there's so many things that they're navigating as they're coming to terms with vision loss. But knowing that services like audio description exist and are out there are critical to letting people know they can live a full and normal life. So I really agree with that point, Jonathan. That resonated with me very deeply. And I think we should be having these conversations with service providers and holding them to a higher standard and making sure that they do pass on this information. So I agree that running education campaigns would be good for the networks to do, but also within our own communities. I think we have an obligation to also do the work that's needed in terms of making sure that people who are new to vision loss actually know that this is available. I also just wanted to quickly, while I'm unmuted and I've got the rite of passage, I just wanted to say I really love this idea of mainstreaming audio description, because I have to tell you, when I first discovered audio description, it was on DVD. And my best friend, who's fully sighted, once she discovered it was a thing, she would never purchase a DVD unless it had audio description, because she suddenly realized that she could be looking after the kids, she could be cleaning, she could be cooking, she could be doing a myriad of other things and not having to look at the screen, but she could still follow what was happening. So she's been a huge supporter of audio description for a very long time, and she doesn't need it, in air quotes, but it's there and it's something she really appreciates. So very supportive of that idea of mainstreaming AD. Thanks.
Can I just jump back a second to the previous question as well? First of all, sorry, on this one, before we launched, at the time that we launched audio description on broadcast television, we provided Vision Australia with what we called a sizzle reel. The intent was, and this was at Vision Australia's request, they were quite proactive at the time. They recognised that many members didn't really know what audio description was or what its benefits could be. And they wanted to send something out that would explain that This video was a collection of segments of ABC content that were audio described, the intent being to raise awareness and also tell people how they could go about turning audio description on their television. We also have a help site. If you go to the ABC help pages, you will find information on how to use audio description both on broadcast TV and on video on demand. But I remembered that I didn't answer the previous question, which was about guidelines. It was a really good question. I'm sorry I didn't get to that. To the best of my knowledge, Australia does not have a robust set of audio description guidelines. That's not to say that they don't exist around the world. As Lauren mentioned, there are broadcasters that have been audio describing for decades. So there are a bunch of recommendations. And this is something that I know that there are some researchers in Australia who are looking at this problem at the moment. That said, we are looking at how we go about what does best practice audio description look like? How important is it to use the same voice for a series? How important is it that the accent, that the dialect of the audio describer complements what's happening on screen, that relates to the location where it's shot? There are all kinds of questions, and these should formulate the guidelines for audio description best practice. I understand that's being looked at, that's being worked on, and I'm looking forward to participating in that process. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have Katie with her hand up, but she is labelled as Tama Lever, but I can identify her as Katie Ellis.
Hi, this is Katie Ellis from Curtin University, definitely me. I don't know why I have Tama Lever down here. I think I could say some things, get some attention, to be taken more seriously as a man maybe through this opportunity, but I won't do that. So I just wanted to personally say thank you all of you for your wonderful presentations. Having worked with all of you at various points in time in this audio description process, you know, it's really exciting to see where we are now. And my question is for all three of you, and it is around this idea of standards. So Michelle, in your presentation, you were talking about where audio description falls short for the audience and what we can do better. And Lauren, and Gerry, I feel like we can be really optimistic about what comes next with audio descriptions. What do you think standards might be for best practice audio description? I know, Gerry, you just said people are working on it.
I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Starting with Lauren.
Sure. Look, I'm just going to go back to the core principle of nothing about us without us. I think standards are a great idea and they're needed. We need to have something that really drives consistency and good practice right across the industry. But I think it comes back to making sure we engage with a range of people who have lived experience to inform that. So really making sure the consultation piece is front and center as those standards are being developed. Sorry to give sort of a standard line, but yeah, that's kind of where I sit with it.
Yeah, I mean, similar boats. Like it needs to be co-design, co-develop, and work with the right group of users and people, you know. What audio description is, the standard is in Australia, is differ from what is in the UK. So it's gonna work with the people, man.
Absolutely.
So true. And this is my second question, if I can jump in and ask it. What's happening in South Korea, Lauren?
I didn't actually get a chance to watch TV. Well, no, I think I did put something on in the hotel room and it was on. I don't know exactly what is going on with their legislation. I don't know if it is legislated or mandated over there, but certainly for it to have been available since 2006, you'd think there's something that's driving that besides just goodwill. But yeah, really accessible place. The whole community that I was visiting was very accessible in a range of ways, but to, you know, put on the TV and learn that they've had this available since 2006 and we still haven't managed to get where they are, it's a little bit frustrating.
We have a couple more questions, and I have been asked by someone in Q&A if people can identify where they are from when they're asking their questions. Will McRosty was created Description Victoria and is a professional audio describer. And the other person asking questions before was Jonathan Craig from Vision 2020, and then Tama and Katie are both from Curtin University. So just following up on that. An anonymous attendee, so I can't clarify, sorry, Michelle, where they're from, has asked, Gerry, could you tell us who is doing the research into standards? Interested to follow.
I understand that there are some people, I'm not sure what I can mention and what I can't mention. I believe that there are some people at Curtin University who are looking into this. Katie, is this something that I can mention or not?
You can mention whatever you'd like. We will be looking at standards later in this project, this team that organised this event today. But I'm not sure if you're mentioning another thing that's happening at Curtin. So yeah.
I've had some discussions with Alison Myers. Alison is a PhD student at Curtin University, and arguably an expert audio describer. I understand that this is something that she's been looking into, and she's been speaking to a lot of people who are active in the audio description industry, and has some projects underway at the moment. The intent of this, as I understand it, is to contribute to the knowledge bank around these guidelines, and will hopefully one day formulate national standards for audio description production. That's about all I really know on that front. Suffice to say that I think that this is a very, very exciting move forward.
Thanks, Gerry. And Fran Maybe, an amazing audio describer and trainer of audio describers, has asked, would the ABC be open to contributing their described content to a repository, ideally global, of programs that already have AD attached? And is there a process in the ABC by which anyone researching all their current offerings to see if there is already AD in existence for those titles? Pass-through of existing AD is a huge issue internationally for titles that get shared between networks and providers.
It's a great question. I don't have an answer for it. I believe that there is an international database of audio described programs. I don't recall what it is. Maybe somebody else can tell us, drop it in the chat. As for the ABC contributing what titles it has that are audio described, I think it's a really great idea. It's something that I'm happy to take to people at the ABC, but I would love to see information about the volume, the library, the growing library of audio described content in one central resource that's really easy to find. I know that if I want to find a program that is on to see where a program is streaming, there are a number of services that I can go to. I think Just Watch is one, and there are a few places like this that I can, jump into my app and type the name of the program, and it'll tell me whereabouts that show is currently streaming, be it Netflix or Amazon Prime or Stan or whatever. Wouldn't it be great to have a service like that to be able to quickly and easily find what's audio described and whereabouts you can watch it? Yeah, it'd be great to contribute to something like that. Best I can say at this stage is that we take it to the powers that be at the ABC and see what they have to say. Thank you for the suggestion. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. I have one more statement from Alison, obviously responding to what you were mentioning, Gerry. She was saying her research into AG guidelines does involve members of the blindness community. At that, unless anybody else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Oh, the real Tama Lever from Curtin University has put his hand up.
Hello. Yes, this is Tama Lever, not the Katie Ellis version of Tama Lever. I'm not quite sure why we had that, but we fixed it now. I have a more philosophical question, I guess, about how audio description has historically been and whether it always needs to be this way in terms of because so much of it's being provided using on-demand services. So one of the limitations of audio description has always been it has to fit into the gaps. It has to fit into the bits where either we have to bring the volume down on something else or, you know, it's an art form of fitting into the gaps in some ways. On-demand doesn't have to be just in the gaps. You can slow things down. You can pause things. Has there ever been an internal conversation about not always doing audio description to fit into the gaps as you would have to for broadcast? Or is that just a step too far in the sort of current evolution of things?
I'm happy to dive into this unless there's anything, Michelle, that you want to contribute. Okay. I'm hoping that it's just an evolutionary thing. As Lauren said, we're at the start of the journey. We've got a long way to go. I think that the benefit of extended audio description can't be overstated. The problem with broadcast is that we're tied to the linear terrestrial schedule, and we literally have 53 minutes to play this show, and then something else is going to start. But as you've quite correctly pointed out, we don't have that limitation with video on demand. So I'd like to think that we will evolve to embrace extended audio descriptions, to be able to elaborate on things like the cast. Who's in the show? What do they look like? A location. What does the place look like? What's important? What's useful and helpful for what does a sighted user take away from watching the musical Oliver on TV? Well, they see that it's set in a London of, I don't know, 200 years ago or whatever. And there's a lot that a sighted user takes away from that show before there's any sound. To have that described to somebody who doesn't see the screen so clearly or who otherwise benefits from the audio description would be great. And the benefit of having video on demand and people being able to have this content announced without interfering with the playback would be really helpful. I see this as an evolution, and I'm looking forward to us getting there. SBS, we work very closely with SBS, and I'm pleased to say that, you know, Michelle and I meet up with the SBS team every few weeks. We have a community of excellence where we discuss best practices, things that we can do. And I know that the work that they're doing in this space, they're doing some really exciting stuff. They're working also very closely, directly with people who are blind and have low vision, who are helping them evolve their service. And I find that so exciting in many ways. Again, nothing about us without us. So I think our move toward improving the service is something that is hopefully just it's around the corner. I'm hoping it's just time now.
It's really exciting and so important, I think, to flag that it's our public broadcasters that are pushing the envelope here, given the global appetite for supporting public broadcasting seems to be going backwards in other spaces. But fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. In the aim of allowing everyone to have a bit of a break, I'm sure everyone would like a little bit of time to have a think about what everyone has talked about today as well. I will leave it there. There are still a couple of pending questions, so feel free as panelists to respond to those directly.
Let's quickly say something if that's all right.
Absolutely, Lauren.
I just wanted to pass on my thanks and congratulations to the team at the ABC. It's very evident to me, as someone who's been working in this space for a long time, that cultural change has occurred. And it's so fantastic to see that you're not just doing this, you're embracing it, you're celebrating it. And on behalf of the blind and vision impaired community, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
That's a lovely way to end. Thanks so much, Lauren, Gerry and Michelle, for your time. And also, I did also want to mention SBS, who is here in our audience today as well. And we will return again after a 20-minute break, which takes us to 10:30 Western Standard Time or 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm looking forward to handing over to a couple more amazing speakers at that point. And thanks very much, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back from the break. We are transitioning now to two further speakers, and it's my pleasure. Oh, wow, Kevin, you and I look like we're carbon copies of each other. Sorry, I've just noticed for those of you, if we were to do an audio description right now, it would be an interesting moment where Kevin and Tama have both appeared on screen. Both appear to have the same dark green khaki shirt on. Both have a similar amount of stubble. Only Kevin looks more distinguished because he has actual proper headphones on, whereas Tama is clearly not making the effort. But in introducing Kevin from Red Bee Media, Kevin is a leader, the leader of Red Bee Media's Australian audio description team, which provides AD for ABC, SBS, the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Services, and other local clients. As well as his team of 8, he coordinates a Follow the Sun effort, which is a wonderful expression, in collaboration with AD teams in the UK and the United States. He's been working in AD for 7 years and in accessibility services with Red Bee for more than 11 years now. So Kevin, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. I will share my screen. Hopefully that works. Cool. I hope that's not in the way. Okay, initially we plan to give a short presentation on the history of audio description from the perspective of our company, which is currently responsible for the most audio description that Australia has ever seen on free-to-air television and Australian on-demand services. It's a little self-serving, but it's been a non-stop half a decade of hard work, so it's not an undeserved pat on the back. But an interesting through line developed as I was collating documents and figures, and even the diary of respected audio description pioneer Fran Matthey. And I think it's that through line which adds a lot of value to this presentation. Fran's obviously here today, so there's a fact checker who can catch me if I'm wrong. Like many great films and also a lot of bad ones that I've had the pleasure or displeasure of working on, we start our story in the middle. Oops, I don't want to draw. Stop drawing. Ignore that. In late 2019, the federal government announced that it would be giving grants to both the ABC and SBS to provide 14 hours of audio-described programming each week, which would commence at the end of June 2020. It worked out quite well today because we've heard from Lauren Henley what prompted this, and from Gerry and Michelle about the broadcaster's perspective, and now you can hear the story from another angle. At this point in time, I am a one-man band. I have a freelance audio engineer and a small cast of voice actors, but the majority of my time is spent as part of RBMA's file or offline captioning team doing pre-recorded work. The state of affairs is that when an audio description job comes in, I would script it, work with the clients to get script approval, then coordinate recording and sending. As soon as it's done, I put on my other cap and I return to captioning. This was, from a business perspective, a necessity. I needed to have a foot in each camp because there was no way they could maintain full-time employment from AD work exclusively, but we also didn't want to let that pool of knowledge dry up. Now that there were grants coming to fund free-to-air TV AD, I was not only moved to a full-time position, but we began what I've come to affectionately regard as the Avengers arc. Other people, older people, would call it the Magnificent Seven moment, when it was time to start assembling a team of heroes. And this is kind of the crux of the issue. And it's why we have to go back to the start. Prior to being acquired by Red Beam Media, this wing of the company was the Australian Caption Centre. AD training was first offered in September 2004, advertised on the fridge in the kitchen. It was a temporary 3-month position at that stage. 3 people were recruited, including Fran Matthew, and Louise Fryer, who was working for the BBC, was brought over to help train. Additional support was provided by several people from the Royal Blind Society. In December of the following year, the team celebrated the end of their training with a screening of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was their first full feature. Discussions were had about what the ACC could do with AZ, and there was a pilot project of 10 DVDs that would result in those kind of wonderful late nights where sticky tape and hopes are holding a project together as you try to finesse a workflow. But other than the stress and the grind, the films were successfully finished before deadlines. In November 2005, ACC was bought by Red Beam Media, which put a big question mark over the AD experiment. 2 of the 3 starters left in March 2006, and it was quiet on the AD front until May 2007, when a series of DVD titles were worked on for Roadshow. Though one of the originals came back, it was still a small operation. During this period, 2 captioners were poached to be trained, one of whom will recur later in this story, and the other being Alison Myers, who presented at the last symposium run by Curtin University and has already been name dropped today. Like the cryptic journal of a lost explorer, Fran's journal of the story of AD in Australia trails off. It's setting up 2 teasers, that she would be journeying to London to train with the Red B team over there, and that she would be testing several other people when she returned with an eye to build a team. And this is where we reach a great point to start the story running in parallel to ours. I don't want to draw on the thing. Thank you. In the UK, the Broadcasting Act of 1996 dictated that audio description was required on UK programs along with captions. At the beginning of 2000, the BBC began testing its audio description service on a system designed by BBC research and development engineers. A test audience of 50 were given specially adapted set-top boxes to enable them to listen to broadcasts. At this point, the ability to receive AD through your TV remote was years away. In August 2000, 3 permanent members of AD staff were recruited, who still remain with the company today. At this stage, Red B Media is the BBC, hence the B in our name. It's an homage to our origins, but it would eventually sprout into its own company in 2005. Since the separation, while retaining BBC as a client, Red B Media UK grew to provide AD services for 5, Channel 4, UK TV, BT Sport, and American client Discovery. When I mentioned that Louise Fryer was able to come out and help Australians, it was because the UK were, by then, years into their own development. Now, here's a significant thing about the legislation. Ofcom, the Office of Communications, mandated that 10% of content that airs requires audio description. The public service broadcasters in the UK voluntarily agreed to 20%. Channel 4 aims for at least 45% across their main 5 channels, but they hit a whopping 58% on the main channel last year. Not to be outdone, BBC aims for 40% of their content to be AD'd. Just a year or 2 ago, the UK team undertook the mammoth task of the entire Doctor Who back catalogue for On Demand as an example of their commitment. When a minimum is demanded, it turns out that exceeding the minimum becomes a point of pride and a metric of competition, as a more accessible broadcaster has a wider appeal. In 2015, the ABC launched a trial of audio description on iView, which has been well covered by Gerry and Michelle today. But for us, between about 2010 and 2018, the RBMA AD team fell into a quiet routine. Fran Matthew and Joe Ellis were our only 2 members. Remember that they are outnumbered by even just the 3 original people in the UK from as far back as 2000, which was when there was morning cartoons and they showed Pokemon, and I was in primary school, so I remember both of those facts. The last entry of Fran's cryptic journal referenced returning from London to build a team, and this was unfortunately the entire scope of it. She would train Joe, and the 2 would be the extent of the growth in a limited market. For Fran and Joe, films or TV series would be commissioned, and they'd seek out new clients, but it wasn't a done thing. AD was still very much treated as an optional extra by production companies, one that you had to pay for, which made it further unappealing for people who didn't even know what it was. When Fran and Joe were not doing these local jobs, they were a support unit for the UK team, taking an allocation of scripts at the start of the week. Most importantly, though, without that steady stream of UK work being available because it was legislated over there, there would also not have been much place for either Fran or Joe to remain on the slow drip drip of local content. And that too was how I started. I was originally a captioner who was optioned to the team for 1 day a week. And depending on the strains of the captioning work list, that was sometimes 0 days a week. One of our proudest but lesser known collaborations with ABC happened during this time when we worked with ABC Radio to provide live AD for the New Year's Eve fireworks, one of the most prominent public events in the national calendar. And it was also our first significant live AD event, which we dubbed a trial by firework. It continued as an annual tradition that Fran carried on even after Red Bee Media. Over time, life circumstances took their toll on the team until it was just me, taking jobs as they come, but very much a captioner who was moonlighting as a describer. And so the third act crescendo begins, as the RBMA team is in the process of literally moving offices when management informs me that there's talks of grants being given to ABC and SBS, for whom we were providing captioning services at the time, to start to provide AD. As a side note, choosing to move to a mostly work from home arrangement in 2019 was nigh on Nostradamus level of planning. As details are finalized, a plan is devised to start a gradual ramping up of content. After all, we were starting at 0 work and 1 person, and will soon be at many work and hopefully more people. So we implement that plan, aiming to be at our starting output of 14 hours per week for each client as of June, but with a soft launching in the preceding months. I chose not to go through the yearbooks to give you a staffing number for the RBMA UK team. It's mostly boring and you won't know anyone. What I can tell you is that from the 3 people who initially started the team, as of 2020, there were about 20 describers, a scattering of scripters, those who only script but don't record, anchored by an AD department head who had 2 supervisors serving them and a dedicated assistant for the team. It was a little operation unto itself. By contrast, in 2020, I had my recording booth and my enthusiasm. 2 things happened very quickly. First, I panic. Second, we realized that our workflow isn't built for scale. We were every single couple who has ever failed on My Kitchen Rules. My wife and I make great gyoza, therefore we'll just multiply this by 7 to serve 14 people. The timings are off, the ratio of ingredients is off. So over the course of some tough nights, we work in cooperation with the UK team to adopt their workflow while developing our own way of receiving allocations from the clients and handling media. Plus, and this was the annoying part, having to build a home recording studio because suddenly even our recording booth is unavailable, and it's equally suddenly difficult to order things online because so is everyone else. In case anyone forgot, and how could you? This was during the first days of a global pandemic, which is simply the best time to form a new department almost from scratch. While everyone was vying for toilet paper, we were trying to source sound panels. And my makeshift construction behind me might indicate what we went through, as this is simply a bunch of foam panels pinned to a board which is hooked on old IKEA lampposts. I referenced earlier one of Fran's trainees who had come back again, the one who was an early starter along with Alison. And that's where Phil re-enters our story. And at a crucial time, he would be the Steve McQueen to my Yul Brynner. With his experience and training, along with his own knowledge of audio tech, he was able to join the quote unquote team in 2021 and hit the ground running. Now we're 2. Over the remainder of 2021, we would form a group of 5 as we poached a live captioner from RBMA, then nabbed 2 external hires, including the angel from The King and I with Lisa McCune. But that isn't what kept us going. 5 people would have put us up to the UK's 2005 level of staffing. What enabled us to stay afloat while rapidly bringing inexperienced people up to speed was the fact that while we were as a country so far behind on audio description, there had been more than 20 people churning out work daily in the UK. Our biggest asset was that this huge team had been building a great big archive, and they had agreements with their clients that they would be able to on-sell the work. I had a really funny gag queued up here. I was going to start playing a video that was just a redacted copy of our archive, which is how we checked whether a new allocation is one we've done before and therefore one we can reuse. I was going to mime Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire" while it scrolled for a while, and it would be this big wall of black bars because I have to redact the details. So it ends up looking like The Matrix if they'd made The Matrix in the 1930s. And while I'm copying this over, it kept constantly crashing because it got to 3,000 pages in Word and 161,000 rows in Excel. I managed to do a smaller sampling. So here we go. And we're off. I kind of feel like the Tetris theme is more appropriate here. Each line here is an episode of a TV series, be that a 5-minute children's animation or a 90-minute prestige drama. There's a scattering of films from the shortest to, well, the longest day, which would have taken the longest week to do. It also includes duplicates, to be clear. If we do a film for BBC and Channel 4 decides to show it, we don't redo the work, we check it against C4's requirement and resend it. If that same film ends up showing on ABC or SBS, we do the same again with the original BBC file. So some things in here will be there 3 or 4 times. But importantly, the other clients will have that file and the audience will have that content. This is the closest we've gotten to what Gerry was talking about earlier, having a single archive of AD, since we've built it across a number of broadcasters around the world. To understand the scale, in order to not crash my computer again, I took 3,000 rows to make that video, which took 27 seconds to scroll at a pretty brisk pace. We have 161,000 rows in the system, so thankfully we're not going to be here that long. It's partly a brag, but it illustrates a point. By the very first day of 2020, before the RBMA team was even assembling, we were up to, the equivalent of Iron Man 2 of our Avengers plotline. We were working to get ready for Australian free-to-air TV, but already had 91,000 entries in the archive. We've almost doubled it in 5 years. Again, including duplicates for repeats, etc. That is still an immense amount of work. For frame of reference, every new program that airs on ABC or SBS could fall under our purview of making it accessible to the audience. So could everything before 2020. I referenced The Longest Day because it's a great movie, and it's a long one that would require a meaty script to adequately describe, but it's also old, 1962. My apologies to anyone catching strays by that comment about being old. You already know when I was watching Pokemon, so I've aged myself. But when The Longest Day landed in our archive per a request from a UK client, it was the middle of last year. They didn't ever audio describe it, even for later DVD releases. I know because I've got it. Which means it would take 62 years after release for this very, very good film to be accessible. And I can tell from reading the back, this one definitely wouldn't be on Lauren's friend's shelf. And as we reach the present day, don't need to watch that again. As we reach the present day, the size of the RBMA team sits at 8, but there are 37 people in full-time employment in the RBM UK team, with a number of freelancers to bolster effort during busy periods. Several scripters were trained to become full describers, and more scripters were hired to backfill those positions. We've even started building an American team dedicated to the American client discovery. One of the earliest UK describers has since become our excellence lead, whose job is to refine and enhance our training procedures, run regular workshops internally, and importantly, dedicate themselves to maintaining our high standards, which can often be lost in the Sisyphean task of pushing the boulder up the hill each week, only to see it roll down the other side as more jobs arrive. Now that we're in a position where we can tread water, we're also able to evaluate our assumptions. We've been working with the UK, with SBS's in-house blind and low vision QCs on in-depth studies of our scripts. And if I'm not mischaracterizing this relationship, we have a standing invitation to join their workshops with their audience. Feedback from both ABC and SBS is passed on to us, and it's so very valuable because this is what the audience wants or needs. We are constantly reevaluating our best practices, which has been one benefit of a relatively young team, that we can come in with our Australian attitudes and question things, question why things are done the way that they are. Not always disrespectfully, but it's easy to fall back on tradition for tradition's sake. And the UK team has at least told us that they appreciate new people coming in and challenging their assumptions. They may not necessarily fully believe that. Sorry. We've been fortunate to get to this point where we can handle work to a relatively comfortable extent. We're able to absorb what we call box set launches, where an entire series drops at once, as opposed to weekly episodes. Remembering that the target was intended to be 14 hours a week, we've been hitting more than 20 hours a week regularly across both ABC and SBS. And that's not factoring in those kinds of box set launches, where we spread them out to do an episode every day or two in order to meet the deadline. Just like this complex story I've been telling, where we've been moving forward and back in time, so it is with audio description. AD in Australia can barely vote, it's so young. For every new release advertised on TV with the AD logo, there are 20 that are in the past that haven't been made accessible yet. And if the point I've been trying to make hasn't been apparent, here's a graph. Since the UK's legislation for AD, their team has been able to grow to the size it is today, with the steady work enabling them to invest in building and training a team that can not only handle broadcast work, but can seek out more work elsewhere. And on the flip side, the lack of legislation in Australia saw AD relegated to a B team. It was nice to have in our tool belt, but it was relying on the UK work to stay in operation because local jobs are not consistent enough. With the grants, at least, we were able to further our relationship with our clients by taking on this AD side for them. And that's the foundation upon which we've built. And as much as I want to make, an Ashes-like rivalry with our UK compatriots, it was really only because they were established, that they had a huge archive on which to draw, that we were able to build ourselves up quickly enough to be independent. They've actually won the Hermes Award for Best Audio Description for a series 3 years running. In fact, I'm glad that Gerry highlighted our work on Bluey, because it was actually that episode, Sleepy Time, which we submitted and won the Hermes Award for just this year. And yes, when I talk about the UK team, I do say them, except when we win awards, in which case it suddenly becomes we. The proudest moment for me came a couple of years into this process. A rather difficult film came up in the work list, which is always death, because it means that a describer is going to be unavailable for anything else for probably a whole week. But in that always relieving exhale, we discovered that it was one we had already done and could therefore reuse the existing project. But we had done it for SBS, and it was a UK client requesting the film. So it finally felt like we were paying them back for helping us find our feet. And in case you're wondering, yes, the UK team has been audio describing Pokemon since 2024, and I am immensely jealous. Thank you for your time and attention. I know that history lectures can feel like a whirlwind of dates, and thank you to Curtin University for once again organising a wonderful symposium.
Magic. Thanks so much, Kevin. I feel like we should have had the Avengers theme music building as you slowly told that story. I think it would feel quite appropriate to the narrative that's built up there. We will save questions for Kevin to be combined with our next speaker, and then there'll be a Q&A session. So in that spirit, it's my pleasure now to introduce John Simpson. John has been working in the field of accessibility since 1986 as Executive Officer with Blind Citizens Australia. In 1998, he led a research project funded through the Commonwealth Office of Disability to review the potential for introducing AD as part of Australia's transition to digital television. He's also worked as National Manager within Vision Australia's Accessible Information Solutions Division, where he managed their AD service, Vision Australia Radio, and the division's overall operations. In 2020, John was honoured with the Award of Member AM in the Order of Australia for significant service to people who are blind or have low vision. And Catherine will be assisting with John's slides. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you to the team at Curtin for the opportunity to be part of this day. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm particularly pleased to be speaking at this point in the program because I want to particularly focus, as the slide in front of you says, on where we go with audio description on commercial television. And sorry, a bit of computer adjustment. And the proposition is that, if we can go to the next slide, thanks, Catherine. The proposition is, while audio description might have been a nice to have in the past, I believe, and my colleagues in the blind and vision impaired community believe, that we've gone from it being something that was nice to have to the fact that with emerging technologies and with the changing community attitudes, it's now a right to have, and that's what I want to address today. I should just make the point that my slides are fairly dense with data, and I'll try and read the key points, but in any event, I'm more than happy to make the presentation available to people following today's event. So commercial television providers. In my comments today, I'm encompassing both the free-to-air TV networks, their related catch-up services, subscription TV providers, the Foxtels, etc., video streaming services. I also want to focus on the advertising industry, and finally to look at government developments and policy developments, which Lauren touched on earlier. If we can go to the next slide. The question is, so why now? Well, as I say, community expectations have increased dramatically, and I'll look particularly at the Disability Discrimination Act in a moment. Emerging broadcast capacity and capabilities have increased substantially, even since the introduction of digital television, which I still believe should have been our gateway to the introduction of audio description. There is assistive technology now that certainly can be brought to bear in relation to audio description, both in terms of synthetic speech and artificial intelligence. There's content availability, and we'll have a look at that briefly. There is a need for greater audience reach. The television networks, the streaming services are all vying to increase their market share and their overall reach. And of course, from the advertising industry's point of view, there's a need for maximising impact. And as we'll see at the end of this presentation, there is also the development of strong government policies. Next slide, thanks, Catherine. So let's look at community expectations, and I won't dwell on this. Lauren's already talked about the UN Convention and how it's so directly, that's the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and how it so directly impacts on this argument, and the fantastic work that Lauren and others did in having that decision from the UN some years ago certainly was a landmark, and certainly made government, although they denied their responsibility, but behind the scenes they certainly made some quick decisions, which, as we've heard, led to the introduction on our public television networks. If I can go to the next slide, thanks, Catherine. But I want to touch on the Disability Discrimination Act, and this year the Australian Human Rights Commission have published guidelines on equal access to digital goods and services. And the next slide, thanks. And if we have a look at that, firstly, we can see that the Disability Discrimination Act specifically covers, among other things, provision of goods and services and facilities. It also, interestingly, covers administration of government laws and programs, which could be brought to bear, I believe, in relation to licensing requirements. And if we go to the next one, thanks, Catherine. Specifically, Section 22 of the DDA covers those things that are covered as goods and services, and I highlight here entertainment, which certainly encompasses television in its many forms, and also telecommunications as key elements here. So if I go to the next slide then, sorry, just before I go to the, sorry, Alison, just before I go to the next slide. So I believe, and those who work with me believe, that there's an even stronger case now for looking to the DDA, thanks to the guidelines that have been produced, as a way to put pressure on the commercial providers, and I'll use that term broadly, in the future. So, sorry, to go to, where am I at? No, I'm right. Sorry, if we can go to the next slide then, Catherine, just while I take a sip of water. We can talk about emerging technologies. And firstly, there's the medium itself. Digital television broadcasting, by its nature, provides, as the ABC and SBS have demonstrated, the capacity for the inclusion of secondary audio provisions such as audio description. Emerging video and audio compression standards that allow for greater bandwidth flexibility, and I'll touch on this in a minute, are a key component in why now. As I say, improving synthetic speech algorithms are there and certainly could be applied to AD production, particularly in association with artificial intelligence. The whole area of internet transmission of program content, both live and as on-demand services, well, the ABC and SBS are certainly showing that that is possible. And of course, as I say, artificial intelligence, including facial recognition, is there. If we go to the next slide, just to touch on the question of video capacity, when digital television was introduced in Australia, the MPEG Layer 2 standard was used. These days, the networks are moving towards MPEG Layer 4, which provides a 50% more effective use of the bandwidth. And in the not too distant future, the standard HEVC will further reduce bandwidth requirements. And of course, every reduction in or further compression provides more capacity for the TV broadcasters. And we see that with broadcast television, with the additional video channels that the commercial providers include. And of course, with ABC and SBS, that includes the use of the package for audio channels, such as the ABC's various national services. For the next slide, if we can, I want to just touch on this issue that's always been put up by the TV networks of unavailable bandwidth. And the reality is that, as the slide suggests, all of the networks are given the same bandwidth allocation under the digital spectrum. And my point here is simply, if the ABC and SBS have capacity for audio description, so do the commercial providers. Just as a side comment, in fact, it would be highly, completely feasible these days for all of the networks under their current configurations, with the exception of SBS, to provide what we might think of as open audio description services, that is, just as part of their mainstream transmission, because each of the commercial networks and the ABC, and we'll focus particularly on the commercial networks, duplicate their primary outputs. The 10 network on channels 1 and 15, this is a metropolitan area table that we're looking at here. Channel 10 on 1 and 15, 7 on 7 and 71, 9 on 9 and 91. So even without going to the whole issue of putting into place a separate element within the available bandwidth, the networks could, in fact, today provide on one of those duplications a described version of the programming while maintaining an undescribed version on the alternative. I've mentioned audio description. If we can, sorry, I've mentioned artificial dissemination. Oh dear. I've mentioned artificial intelligence. You can tell I live in the country. Artificial insemination. One of the interesting developments of recent times, and something that demonstrates how readily AI could be put to use in relation to AD, is the fact that the Ray-Ban sunglasses company has produced a product that they call their Meta Smart Glasses. This, incidentally, was not developed as assistive technology for blind people, but as a mainstream item, and is sold in the main to people who want to be able to listen to music through a pair of headphones and an earpiece type construction, or to take photographs and so forth while they're on the move. And this technology within itself has the ability to answer specific questions such as, hey, Meta, read this text, and it'll read what's in front of you. down to, hey Meta, remember this person as my mother, so that the next time the glasses see the see the image, they will describe it as your mother or your sister or your brother or whatever. Certainly, that is just one example of where AI could be used to enhance the availability of audio description. Let's go then on the next slide to content availability. And I think we all appreciate that in Australia, we're already producing for commercial television networks programs that, while not audio described for the market here, are sold to overseas markets with audio description. And the examples that are always used are Neighbours and Home and Away. Of course, the streaming services such as Netflix produce described content in Australia. And there are many, many feature-length movies that are produced for cinema release and Blu-ray and so on and so forth that have audio description that can become available to the TV networks in the future. And then if we go to the next slide, this is just a quick example of a bit of work I did last week just to have a look at programs that air on Channel 4 in the UK that are available or currently being screened here in Australia. And there are 15 different programs on the list on the slide. And if we go to the next one, Alison, you can see a similar comparison for NBC. So there is certainly content available apart from what can be generated in Australia that can be put to use here. And that touches on the comments made before about the work of Red Bee Media and their exchange of content. Certainly the networks can't run the argument that they simply have to produce all the AD content for themselves here in this country. I want to then come to audience reach, and it's a few years ago, but back in 2017, the American Foundation for the Blind did a survey in the US and found that 96% of vision impaired adults watch television on a regular basis. About 81% watch for at least an hour a day. 55% watch for 4 or more hours a day. And I would argue that while the platform that they might watch has, of course, changed somewhat since 2017, there's no reason to think that interest in television, and I'll have a look at this in a moment, has deteriorated. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare tells us that 93% of people aged 65 and over have some form of eye condition, ongoing eye condition. There are, in fact, around 450,000 people in Australia who are vision impaired or blind, and by vision impaired, we mean where their vision loss is a substantial detraction from their daily lives. More than 70% of those are people over the age of 65, because basically blindness and vision loss in this country is related to aging. Most of the major eye conditions are age-related, and the numbers are expected to grow to 564,000 by the end of this decade. So there's certainly a direct market there, and that's without thinking about what we often refer to as those secondary markets that were talked about earlier, of people who simply need audio description because they can't have their eyes directly on the screen at the time they want to keep in touch with their favourite program. So let's go to the next slide, and how Australians watch television, and some work that our colleagues at ACAN did in 2022. And they found that 81% of those surveys surveyed said that free TV is important to them, and that figure grew to 89% for respondents over 50. 72% said that catch-up services, iView, etc., were important. 65% said that subscription subscription video services. So there is a sizable market, as I say. If we can go to the next slide, and I want to go back into history a little bit, and the work that as part of Blind Citizens Australia, I did in the 1990s when we published our report, When a Word is Worth 1,000 Pictures. Part of that study was what we called the deprivation study. To quote from the objective, as mentioned in that report, this was to identify and report on the extent and level of deprivation that is common across the various elements of television in Australia. So if we can go to the next slide, we work from the proposition that television content is produced and broadcast so as to be attractive to the broadest possible audience. The program maker wants his work to be enjoyed and his message to be understood by all who view the content. And the advertiser, of course, wants to communicate with as many of those people as possible with a potential interest in their product or service. And we argued in this research, and I would maintain the position today, that without AD, those maxims can't be realised for the full potential audience. So next slide, if we can. Thanks, Catherine. What we did with the study was we ran a 2-day workshop with a group of about 12 blind or vision impaired TV viewers. We divided the content into 9 categories and had video, audio clips that we then showed to these people, and fundamentally we asked them to, with some key questions, to give us an understanding of what they were able to comprehend from the segment. And we did this, if I can go to the next slide, across various aspects of television, and they're listed here from pre-recorded drama, situation comedy, right through to news, to information elements, and of course we included advertising. And I won't go through the next slide. You can go to the next slide, thanks. I won't go through this in detail, but what we did was we'd established a benchmark figure as an expectation on a points basis of the elements of a particular segment, and then we calculated the results across 2 groups, those with low vision and those with who were totally blind, and expressed that as a percentage of the key elements that those people were able to perceive. And if we can go to the next slide, thanks. And what we found was that 43 of the 48 segments shown, these were the program segments, I'll come to advertising in a minute, required a descriptive response. And for the low vision group, there was only 1 segment where the group achieved a comprehension rating of 60% or greater. Well, 60% was the highest. There were 9 segments where the low vision subgroup achieved 20% or less in a comprehension test, and 1 particular segment where they only achieved 5%, and they were aggregated against the 7 people in the group who had low vision. We did a similar thing with the group who were totally blind, and the best that the blind subgroup was able to achieve was to achieve comprehensive rating of 50% in only 1 element, and there were 3 segments where the blind subgroup registered less than 10%. So crude research methodology, I'll agree, but it gave us an understanding of and some way of actually developing the argument about the importance in terms of information access of audio description. And of course, we all know that AD has more elements to it than that. If we can go to the next slide then, thanks. We did the same thing with advertising, because we've always believed that just as we are seeing increasing captioning in advertising to attract the deaf and hearing impaired market, that advertising was the key to encouraging the commercial TV networks to move towards audio description. And we showed 20 ads, and the figures on the screen show that the low vision subgroup achieved 66% recognition factor, and for the blind subgroup, the level dropped to 14%. The comment there that for the low vision group, the most recognisable or comprehensible content was products and services that had a very high community profile, and it was lowest where we asked them to record specific information such as contact details and so forth. Among the blind subgroup, there were 11 ads where none of the group, and that's a group of 5, could provide the information requested. So let's move on to the next slide, thanks. TV advertising standards. I thought let's have a look at what Free TV Australia is saying about advertising in this country. And their work or report released in just last year shows that 92% of Australians tune into free-to-air commercials on a monthly basis. And the comment is that nearly every adult in the country watches commercial TV at some point. And Australian companies spend more than $4 billion on TV ads. That was a 2018-19 figure. So my question is, why not maximise the potential of the vision impaired audience? And we're coming to the end of, if we can move to, government policy response, thank you. There are 3 points here that build on the comments that Lauren made this morning. Firstly, it was in October last year that Ben Saint, who was an advisor to then Minister, well, hopefully still current Minister, Michelle Rowlands, in a meeting with sector representatives, told us that the government intends to amend the Broadcasting Services Act and consult with community before the bill is put to the community. We've had a subsequent discussion in January 2020 this year with Free TV Australia, and they've moved their position to now saying that the networks are not opposed to providing AD, but it's a question of funding. And if we can go to the next slide, that puts us in a very interesting position because in last December, the commercial broadcast tax, the government announced that the commercial broadcast tax was to be suspended for a 12-month period to give financial relief to the networks. Free TV Australia are arguing strongly that change should be made permanent, which would save the networks $50 million per year. Our argument is that if there was a requirement or quid pro quo between the government and the commercial broadcasting sector, that 10% of that allocation go for the provision of audio description services, we'd be well on our way to starting effective audio description on commercial television production. So to summarise on the next slide, we can see that community expectations are now high, and Lauren touched on that earlier. Broadcast capacity and capabilities are certainly in place. Synthetic speech and artificial intelligence are here and are rapidly improving and could significantly improve increase the availability of audio description. There is already content available. The industry is screaming out for greater audience reach. The advertising industry wants to maximise their input, and the government is moving, albeit slowly, and now that we're past the election, hopefully a little bit more quickly, on policy reform. So to go to the last slide, the question really is, why not now? And why don't we move from a nice to have to a right to have? Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. And as I say, my slides and any other information are available in my email address, which is jas@infoalternatives.com.au is there on the screen, but I'm sure the people at Curtin can point you to me if people want to follow up on any of this. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, John and Kevin. such great presentations. Obviously, really different perspectives as well. Again, I'd like to open up an opportunity for our audience to ask any questions that they might have. Let's see if we have any at the moment. Okay, Michelle Kwan, I have a question for Kevin. Can you provide any general feedback that you have received from the audience? Negative and positive.
Negative and positive. We don't receive a lot of positive feedback. It's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. We take that as a good sign that they're just quietly enjoying what we do and don't feel the need to. I mean, obviously, when we're at events like this, everyone is very grateful that we do it. You know, as the guy standing at the gallows about to be hanged says, you know, no noose is good news. So I guess positive feedback is just thanks for doing it. You know, Sleepy Time obviously is an award-winning episode of Bluey, so painting a beautiful picture is the you know, the recognition we get. The biggest negative feedback we get is help, I've turned on AD and I don't want it. How do I turn it off? But in terms of the actual content, it's somewhat contradictory what we receive. A specific type of description, I've had 2 audience members tell me the exact opposite, their perspective on it. So something that's not relevant to the story but builds the scene, something, you know, in a room or in the environment we describe it to sort of flesh out the world and make the setting more real. One person will say, I really love that, you know, it makes me feel like I'm there, I can get a better picture of what's going on. And another person will say, that wasn't relevant, what you told me about, and I spent too long focusing on that because I thought it was going to be relevant, but in fact it's just part of the background. You know, it'd be the equivalent of the Chekhov gun thing. You know, if there's a gun in the set, you know, by the 3rd act someone has to fire the gun. You know, what if the gun is just because he's a gun guy but he doesn't use it? You know, it's that the balancing act of do we describe that there's a gun hanging over the mantle or not? You know, particularly for a mystery, what I tend to do when I'm doing something that's like a murder mystery or something, I'll watch the ending first. I'll figure out who done it and how, because the way that we tell those sorts of stories is there's going to be red herrings. You're going to have misdirects. You're going to have clues that point to someone who did it, but you actually, by the end of the 2nd act, it turns out he didn't do it. We can't just have the clues that are only relevant to the person who did it, because then the audience is going to know far sooner than we want them to know. So what we have to do is put in the red herrings that the director or the author has put in to help tell the story, that we don't know who did it and there's multiple suspects. We can't just leave in everything that points to one suspect. But then we hear from the audience occasionally that, you know, you focused on something that actually isn't relevant and that distracted me, and I spent too long thinking about that thing. Yeah, all we can do is take that feedback on board and, you know, understand that, you know, sometimes the way we describe things, someone will love it and someone will hate it, and that's criticism. You know, we can't please 100% of them, so we just got to try and get the biggest slice of people happy that we can, unfortunately.
Could I jump in there, Kevin? Just to say that one of the frustrations that I guess that you would suffer is the fact that the blind and vision impaired audience is not a unified group.
Yes.
It's largely affected by how people come to their vision loss. Those people who have never had vision have, in the main, and again, I don't want to oversimplify, but in the main, have no interest in things like colour, because it's not relevant to their scheme of things. Those people who, and the majority would fit into this situation, those people who have lived a fair part of their life with sight are looking to recreate the experience from that point of view. So you unfortunately, in terms of how you manage, you're always going to have that dichotomy.
Yeah, 100%.
I just want to also add a comment from Victoria Hunt from SBS, who mentioned the integration of feedback from the blind low vision community. She said Red B audio describers are currently having sessions with SBS's blind low vision script quality review contractors. SBS also shares focus group feedback with Red B. On another question from Jonathan Craig, and I think this is a great one to get both your perspectives on. He's asked, what do you think are the reasons why the UK was so far ahead of Australia in the introduction of AD? And what might be the keys to maintaining the momentum gathered in the last 5 years and protecting the future of audio description in Australia?
I'll go first because it's a one-word answer. Legislation.
We thought you might say that, John.
In terms of why the UK was so far ahead, I think it's possibly, and I don't know, who the stakeholders were over there when they were writing their legislation, but my understanding is that Australia wrote the laws about captions before the UK, but when the UK did it, they bundled in audio description with captions. So it's possibly a case that when we were writing our rules about having captions, AD was too far in the future that they weren't thinking about it. Whereas for the UK, obviously they wrote their laws in 96, and then by 2000 they were working to figure out how to get it done. So it might have just been a timing thing that broadcasters accept that they have to do the captions, so they put aside money. And for the UK, they accept that they have to do the captions and the audio description, and so they put aside the money to do it. And for Australia, it's maybe a bit like, oh, now you want us to do audio description. Well, where are we going to find the money for that? But as well as legislation, like John said, I think we've got such strong advocates in ABC and SBS that even if the money, even if there's no legislation, I think they're still going to do it. They're going to find the money in the margins wherever they can, because I think they know how important this is. Even if they put a vending machine in and have to use that to fund it somehow, maybe.
I was going to see if Alison Myers, who also gave a great response to that question, would like to put in her perspective on that particular question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been doing some research into this, and one of the interesting things is just the reason AD has expanded so greatly in recent years is through the streaming platforms. And one of the reasons for that is that they have they can provide different language options. So they have like language channels, and it's really easy to switch between different languages. And audio description just slots straight into that. And that's what happened in Europe. When Europe was developing audio description, they already had a very established dubbing industry there. So audio description just stepped right in, because audio description, the technology to create and distribute AD is identical to dubbing. So it was very easy for the Europeans to add that. In America, they had the SAP channel, which is an extra audio channel on broadcast television, and that was often used for Spanish language programming, and that's where audio description came in. So AD was provided on the SAP. And I'm a bit shakier on England and New Zealand, but they both, when they switched to digital television, they both used a company called Freeview, which had the same set-top boxes. And these set-top boxes have audio description, have language options. And so the audio description could be provided through those language channel options. And in New Zealand, and I don't know if this is still the case, but originally the AD was provided on the Italian channel. And so it's just having that language option there. But in Australia, we don't have extra language channels on our broadcasters because we put all our foreign language broadcasting on SBS. And so the ABC and the, you know, they didn't have that obligation or the need to provide it. And even Stan and Binge don't have an extra audio channel on there as streamers. So on Stan, you get audio description as an accessibility option. And on Binge, last time I checked, they were providing a separate video. They were providing OpenAD on a separate video. And that's how they were providing it. So I think that's one of the reasons, because technology is a huge impediment and a huge contribution to how AD is provided, but also legislation and also funding. Because I mean, with captions, they started in the early 80s. There was a lot more money in the media industry back then than there is now, and they put up a big fight against captions as well. And you know, I don't think they've ever actually acknowledged how useful captions have turned out to be. So hopefully the same will happen for AD. Thank you.
Did either of you have any response to Alison's perspective there?
Alison's the expert. I will refer to the expert on that.
Perfect.
No, I think I agree.
If there was any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move on in. I do have Katie jumping in. Oh, and Fran. So I might take a couple more questions, and then we have a really exciting panel discussion between Manisha Amin, Bruce Maguire from Vision Australia, and I believe, Kevin, you're going to stay with us too. But before I go, Katie, did you have a question?
I do have a question. My question is for Kevin. Kevin, you mentioned the elusive 10 DVDs that seem to have kicked off the audio description in this country. Are you able to tell us what the titles of these 10 DVDs are?
I had them written down. I had two of them written down. This was from Fran. Fran, please step in. This was from excerpts from Fran's journal that she was writing. So I think only two of them were named. I want to say The Invisible. No, that can't be it. I felt that the piano was one of them, I'm pretty sure.
Yep, the piano was in there, Kev. This is Fran.
Fran, thank you.
Hannibal Rising was one of them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
$1 Million Baby, I think, was in there. Some that I read in my diary and thought I've never seen that film, but actually it turns out I described it. Kevin and the Invisibles, perhaps. Bliss was in there. Yeah, I would have to do a bit more digging for some of the others. I unfortunately didn't get comps of any of them except Hannibal Rising, which is the only one that exists.
Of all the ones. That's a shame. It's not really a gift, that's a curse.
I'm just on a bit of a mission to find out which DVDs these were. I think I have the 3 or 4 that you mentioned. So if anyone in the call knows,
Alison has a bit of a list growing here on the Q&As.
Yeah.
Fran, while I've got you unmuted, would you like to answer your question for John in person?
Oh, yeah, great. Thanks, John. Thanks for your presentation. I just wondered if any of your investigations around legislation, if it was ever brought up by anyone that perhaps the onus of the audio description provision should rest with the content creators rather than the broadcasters, which partly would take away this issue of AD travelling with the product so that it became part of the package, and so that whatever tax breaks you were mentioning might be conceded to broadcasters could potentially apply then to content creators to make that part of their budgeting. I know it currently exists and has for some time for projects that are funded by Screen Australia. They have to provide audio description, but it's far from across the board. And then I feel like then the broadcasters wouldn't have to be waging this battle about ongoing funding with changes of government and that kind of thing if it were actually legislated as part of content creation.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not aware of specific discussions in that area. The broadcasters until more recently, and in fact, I'd say until the last 12 months, 18 months or so, have tended to hide as much behind technology limitations, some of them quite mythical, rather than they've talked about content cost, which of course leads to where you're suggesting, but in a more general sense, they've tended, from my experience, to talk more about technology, bandwidth, et cetera, and that's been reinforced with the commercial networks by their need or want to actually siphon off part of their bandwidth for, you know, these direct advertising or sublet services that we see on some of the networks. So I'm not I agree entirely, Fran, with the premise, but I'm not sure of there being a specific discussion about that. It's an interesting one.
All right, I'm running things down. Any other questions? Ooh.
Catherine, are we ready to go into the next session? Okay, well, I'll take that as a yes. Hi, everyone. It's Katie Ellis from Curtin Uni speaking now. I'll be chairing the next session, which is a panel discussion really focusing on legislation, technology, and what's happening in Australia right now and potentially in the future. For audio description with us, panelists today, we have Dr. Manisha Amin. We've got Kevin rejoining us, initially Heather Locklear style special guest star who's now joined the cast. I have different pop culture references to you.
I'm just quickly Googling that. Who's Heather Locklear?
And Bruce Maguire, Vision Australia. So I'll just read some bios. So Dr. Manisha Amin is the founder and CEO of the Inclusive Design Collective, a social enterprise bringing together leaders in inclusive design for greater good. IDCO specialises in co-design facilitation, systems change and tech for good. And prior to creating Inclusive Design Collective as CEO of the Centre for Inclusive Design, which has received many shout outs already today, Manisha supported the introduction of audio description in Australia. She's on the board of Good Things Australia, the National AI Lab, and she's an adjunct professor at Curtin University. And she has a focus on inclusive design. She identifies as a neurospicy person of colour. And I won't read out Kevin's bio again. I feel we all know him really well by now, and also what his entertainment viewing is all about. And Bruce Maguire, who I'm sure many of us already know, is the lead policy advisor with Vision Australia and has a professional involvement in the disability field for over 40 years and has served on various national and international committees. He was president of the Roundtable on Information Access for People with Print Disabilities from 1994 to 1996 and has been the chair of the Australian Braille Authority. Before joining Vision Australia, Bruce worked as a policy officer for 9 years at the Australian Human Rights Commission. And I thought I'd start the panel today with a question, firstly to Bruce and then to everyone. So Bruce, from your perspective, how's the regulatory landscape for audio description on Australian television evolved, and what impact has this had on accessibility for people who are blind or have low vision?
Thanks, Katie, and it's good to be part of the symposium. I should warn you that I've had ongoing internet issues today, and the connection's been dropping in and out. So if it starts to sort of do that, I'm going to stop my video, but and see if that fixes it. But we'll see how we go. Look, I think there is a simple answer and a more nuanced answer. The simple answer is the regulatory landscape hasn't changed, despite 20 plus years of advocacy. We still don't have amendments to the Broadcasting Services Act. We still don't have any standards that legislated under things like the Disability Discrimination Act. We still have ratified the UN Convention, and we've had a decision against us which hasn't been implemented. Having said that, I think we need to think about what are landscapes, and landscapes tend to change very, very slowly, glacially slowly. And I think that's what has happened with our regulatory landscape. So if you take sort of a big picture, if you can sort of be outside looking down and looking in, I think there are some subtle but significant changes. And I think I think the biggest change is the greater recognition that access and inclusion of people with disabilities is fundamental. That has partly come about as a result of our ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It has been brought to a sharper focus by the Disability Royal Commission on Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of people with disabilities. And it has also been sort of crystallised through initiatives such as the Australia's disability strategy. I think those elements, whilst they may not have changed the legislation per se, have nevertheless sort of ploughed some ground, and I think created an environment in which the legislative seeds are more likely to germinate. I'll finish there, but I'd like to sort of comment later on about the sorts of things that Lauren was talking about, particularly around advocacy falling by the wayside and the importance of advocacy to kind of keep going now, and also to comment further on some of the things that Gerry was saying. But I'll stop and let my colleagues take over.
Manisha, did you have anything you wanted to add about the changing regulatory environment?
No, I think so. Hi, Bruce. It's lovely to hear your voice, even though I can't see you. And it's lovely to be on a call again. I think Bruce has it right. Like, I remember being in a room with yourself and Bruce, oh God, 7 years ago now, and having this same conversation in terms of what needed to change, and then actually just seeing none of it happen. So I think that regulation has actually, it's been like the tail wagging the dog in a lot of ways. In not only in audio description. Oh, there you are, Bruce. I can see you now.
It selected the wrong camera, as it often does.
Well, can I just say, I'm loving the background that you have there with all those guitars as well.
And there's a cello. I don't know whether you can see the cello, but that's there as well.
Yes, I can see the cello as well. And that background is far more interesting in some ways than the regulatory environment, because
my background is always more interesting than I am, Manisha.
No, not than you are. The regulatory environment is not very interesting all the time, and so that's all I can say about it. And it's we've gone backwards really since the times of Graham Innes in the Disability Royal Commission. Sorry, in the Human Rights Commission. And the work that was being done then, instead of moving in a positive way, I think our legislation and regulation has remained quite static. It's not to say that gains haven't been made. I just don't think they've been made there.
Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add here with insight from Richard?
Yes. Just to clarify, it was originally meant to be Red Bee Media's head of operations, Richard, here. I'm not so vainglorious that I want to be like in everything today. He has passed on the notes that he was going to use, so I'll just I've been skimming them. He makes the point that as well as legislation, there's probably a good case to be made that there should be funding from the government for it, because it is an accessibility issue. And, you know, they did give money to the ABC and SBS to do it. So it is a little bit of an imbalance that's what happens for them. And then for the other free-to-air networks, oh, it's out of your own pocket to do. We'll see. You know, it was surprising that I don't want to get political, but the Liberal Party was in power when the grants were given to ABC and SBS, and that is very surprising to me as a lefty that happened. We'll see now. We got Labor they have a very big mandate, so we'll see if they open the purse for the other free-to-air network. Or maybe legislation will come alongside some government funding for it, because it is a very difficult time for free-to-air networks at the moment. They, you know, it's well written about that the revenues on the decline, audience is on the decline. There's so much more competition now, that we now need them to do something extra. It's going to cost money, not just in terms of actual cost of people like me doing the work, but the cost of upgrading transmission and distribution systems, you know, integrating into their on-demand services, which I know there's been some broadcasters have had difficulty doing. It's not as simple as flicking a switch and now we can do AD, and before we couldn't. You know, it took the BBC several years to figure out how to do it, and, you know, just because they were first and they got it right doesn't mean it's going to be as easy for anyone else to do. Yeah, so it's a.
I think there's you know, and I really agree with you, Kevin, but I just want to, I think there's an interesting thing here, and this is the existential conversation in some ways for broadcast television in Australia. I think there's a case to be made for the government paying for audio description for its for our Australian national broadcasters that we pay taxes for. When we think about the other broadcasters, there is this real threat to them from streaming services and other platforms, all of which have also embraced audio description in different ways. Now, they haven't necessarily done it from the goodness of their own hearts. There have been a whole lot of reasons for that. And I think also this notion of people not all speaking one language and watching mediums in different languages has also helped. But the broadcasters, I think, need to really think about their role in this country and their role as organisations that are not necessarily at the forefront of the broadcasting industry now, and what that means to them as a whole. Because I don't think it's just about the handout, nor do I think it's just about the regulation. And in fact, the regulation conversations are more about competition than they are about access and inclusion and experience. So I don't disagree with you at all, but I just feel like, you know, it's almost like some stations have their heads in the sand in a way that they didn't necessarily. I mean, Channel 7, and Bruce, you would know more about this than me, but my understanding was Channel 7 were the first people to put in captioning in Australia, not the public. Is that right, Bruce?
I don't know. John, you might know that. Or Kevin, you might know that. I don't know who started.
Because when Radio Access was still, you know, back in the day before I was involved, but it was actually the free-to-airs were actually at the table at that time in a way they certainly weren't afterwards. So I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I think,
and not to discount what you're saying either, Kevin. I think that's still very valid.
Yeah,
I think that whatever we tie access and inclusion to government funding, we're on very fragile ground. Access and inclusion as a sort of both a philosophical and a social concept will only and can only ever be successful if it's embedded in society, rather than something that's seen as the responsibility of government to pay for it. And I think that's my understanding is governments don't pay for audio description in the US or the UK. Yeah, so why should they pay for it here? Perhaps the national broadcaster is an exception. I don't know, but I think we have to move. We have to sort of continue or find new. I would argue we have to find new ways of promoting old arguments that emphasize the social responsibility around advocacy and inclusion, and that includes the responsibility of broadcasters.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. Look, something I always say about disability inclusion is how innovative it is, and really what we're doing when we introduce accessibility for people with disabilities is we're problem solving, and in the case of audio description, we're creating a new form of media. So I would like to think this is something that all the broadcasters, public broadcasters, commercial stations, video on demand, whoever, and actually my students, my media production students, would start to think about the potential around audio description and what it represents for media internationally. But I just want to stick with you, Kevin, and the international context that is emerging through this conversation we're having. So what are the challenges and opportunities that are unique to creating audio description for Australian television, and how do these differ from international practices?
Opportunities first. Biggest one, obviously, that AD in Australia has never been done at this scale before. It was sort of on an ad hoc basis, as with the 10 DVDs and, a series here and a series there for Stan or whatever. But that means that we're not trapped by tradition. So we have the opportunity to write our own rule book. We can set the standard that we want. We can shape the way we do things going forward. Fran Matthey's presentation at the previous symposium was very illustrative of this point, that we have the chance to create the Australian voice. So, the UK has been doing it for 25 years. They have their way of doing it. The Americans have been doing it for a while. They have their way of doing it. Like, what's the Australian way of doing it? Are we going to sort of be a blend of the two? Because in a lot of ways, this country is culturally sort of split between the UK and America in terms of even, this is off on a tangent, but we have a list of terminology that the UK uses that we don't use, and how we translate things. So we had to fight to include esky because it's an Australian thing, and for them it's a cooler box, and we're like, can't call it a cooler box. Cooler box is what you put a lung in when you're transplanting it. This is an eskies for beers. So we can sort of take what we want from the establishment and change what we don't like. Probably the biggest challenge for me, it's because we have this hybrid thing going on where we are balancing box sets with weekly broadcast. So I don't know of any other country that does this as often as we do it, which is, by episode 3, they'll put the whole series on demand. So we have to race to catch up. As opposed to, I think in the UK, they generally only put it on demand once it's aired, whereas we can sometimes get ahead of ourselves over here, which is not a bad thing. It's just seems like a uniquely Australian thing that we're doing at the moment. I think as well, maybe we don't dub things in Australia. Internationally, there are countries where there are laws where you have to dub something that's in a foreign language into their native language. There are actually voice actors who get assigned to an actor. So, in I think Mexico, there's a Robert Downey Jr. voice actor. So every Robert Downey Jr. movie, it will be this guy doing the voice acting for him. We don't do that over here. We do subtitles, which there's nothing wrong with subtitles, but in terms of AD, it's a bit of an accessibility hurdle because, the language is on the screen. yeah, I think that would be a different challenge to AD over here. Not to say that every country dubs, but there are a number of countries that do dub a lot more than we do. Yeah.
Audio description is definitely cultural. I've read some really interesting research coming out of Spain where they got different audio describers from different countries. I think it was Spain, Italy, the US, to describe exactly the same scene. And they all did something different. They all focused on something completely different in the scene. And in the case of the Italian describers, they described something in the scene that didn't actually happen. It's great research. It's about, two men carrying a basket of bread and a woman walks past.
Yeah.
Drop the bread, right? And the Italian describers say something about the woman interacts with the men, but actually there's no interaction. So what's interesting about this research is that we are very cultural in the way that we describe visual content. So in terms of saying there is one way of describing audio description, it just doesn't cut it in an international sense.
I haven't engaged with any Korean audio description, but I do watch quite a bit of like their reality shows are really, really good. They really invest in them. And I was watching one the other day and all the contestants are coming in and they're all introducing themselves. And, the Australian thing to do is you come in, you get someone's name. Oh, what do you do for a living? And all they were doing here was, oh, hi, I'm such and such. How old are you? Like, what year were you born and what's your star sign? Because they have that cultural thing where the way they address someone is based on, are you younger than me or are you older than me? And so for them, the first thing they want to do is, are you younger than me or are you older than me? And for us, it would be, what do you do for a living? And so it'd be interesting to see how that affects like their audio description. Do they focus more on age than we do, perhaps? Or is that something they just leave for the dialogue, perhaps? If there is actually a way that you address someone based on their age relative to you. Might be something I need to think
There's
about.
also this cultural thing, I think, around inclusion, right? Like speaking more than one language, sometimes you'll see something being spoken or you'll hear something being spoken that when you look at the captions, the words are not actually the same words, they're softened or the swearing's not there. So I think that, audio description is slightly different, obviously, is obviously a different method of translation to captioning. But that piece about how much do you put in, how little do you put in, where do you put it in, what's the most important thing can be culturally determined as well. And I think that there is a really interesting piece and an interesting conversation both in Australia and internationally about whether audio description is actually an adjunct or something that needs to be baked in from the beginning. So I've been talking to some people in India a lot who are doing some research in this area, and they're talking to directors about how they direct films in order for those films to have audio description as one of the things they think about from the very beginning in terms of the spaces they leave, in terms of what's at play, rather than having it as something that's added in at the end as an adjustment. And so I think that notion of those two things is also very interesting. It's a bit like, chairs. Back in the day, we'd go, if you need a desk that moves up and down, that's a workplace adjustment. Now we just say it's personalisation. But the way we think about office design is different if we're personalising for everyone or whether we're adjusting for one or two. So I think that's also playing out at the moment in internationally, particularly in this space.
It's interesting that in the context of web accessibility, we have this idea of building accessibility in from the ground up rather than adding it later on or retrofitting it. And I think there are some applications of that concept in the AD space. It's like some of there are a number of audio described events and scenes that stand out in my memory over the years, but one of them was the first ever audio description of the Sydney New Year's Eve fireworks. And it was actually done by the I think his name was Mr. Fortunato, and he was the actual he created the fireworks. Now he wasn't the sort of the most professionally trained audio describer, but he was able to bring a unique perspective that I don't think anyone else could have, because he actually knew what he was doing when he created these fireworks and why he did it, and what he was trying to achieve. And that certainly resonated with me, because it gave me a much more, if you like, intimate view of or perspective on those fireworks. And so I think that there is some very interesting conversations to be had about the value of incorporating accessibility features like audio description from the start of the content creation.
Absolutely. And, when we were doing the work with ABC and SBS, one thing that stood out for me is one of our user experience people who was working on the project for that month was watching television. They were watching streaming shows actually with audio description on them, just so that they were able to understand what this meeting was. And they watched a show, I won't remember the name of it, but it was a basketball show. It was a documentary on a basketballer, famous basketballer. Sorry? Last Dance, that was it. And they found it fascinating. The audio description changed their perception of this whole thing completely, because they didn't know the names of the basketballers. They didn't know what their positions were or what they were doing. But the audio description actually added that lens in for them, so that someone who had never played basketball got a really rich, deep experience of that program without actually having any sort of blindness or vision impairment either. And so I think we live in a multimodal, multi-experiential world these days. Captions are now baked in for everyone. Why can't audio description be in a similar way?
Absolutely. Renisha, when I first met you, you were not talking about audio description being mainstreamed in this way, so it's interesting to see the progress. Because I think this is a conversation I had with you at the audio description working group. Do you think this will end up like captions, where everyone's using captions? And one of the key reasons people are using caption is to get that extra bit of information. I did some research with Game of Thrones, and people couldn't follow the change in location. They couldn't follow the complicated character names and the family interrelationships. So they were using the captions to do that. And I think back with the audio description working group, we were not really sure if this was a direction that audio description might take. And you're saying now today you think so.
I think that the world of decoding squiggles on a page, what we call reading and writing, has actually left in some ways. That, like, if you look at young people today and the way people experience information, I think that it's very much a world now where people are learning differently and consuming information differently. You only need to look at the increase in podcasts and audio books and the different ways people are learning today. So 7 years ago, I didn't think that this would happen, and it would happen so quickly. And with, large language models with AI, you don't have to be an incredible reader or writer to understand the world today. But if you can listen, you actually have greater superpowers. So I think that transformation is happening. And I think audio description has a strong place to play in that as well. And that's, not to diminish the fact that it's a technology that is not, I know that it's not the easiest technology to implement in an old antiquated system, but it's already an evidence-based, known way to increase cohesion and inclusion in our society for people who are blind and vision impaired. And in fact, as you know, have autism and all sorts of other things as well. So it works for mainstream, but it actually is transformative for some of the most, for people who should never be discounted from our society or not have the ability to actually access the information that they want to.
I would add to that, if I may, and
Bruce, love
that
to know your views on this.
that one of the things that I believe has held audio description back in this country and continues to hold it back is that it is not embedded in the cultural DNA of the blind and low vision community. And it's because audio description has traditionally been produced and delivered using a top-down, sort of almost a colonialist model. I get emails from time to time telling me that if I go along to this particular museum at a particular day at a particular time, I can have a 1 hour audio described tour. Well, I don't want to go to the museum at that particular time on that particular day to have a tour that lasts for less time than it takes me to actually get to the museum. People, particularly the Gen Z, and I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not actually a Gen Z, but I do sort of have a lot of contact with Gen Zs and people who provide services to Gen Zs. And one of the things that Gen Z people tell us all the time is they don't want to organise their lives around services. They want the services to organise themselves around their lives. And I think we have to take the same approach to audio description. You know, we have to embed concepts such as choice and control that are, you know, now sort of an inherent part of things like the NDIS. We have to embed those concepts into audio description, and it goes back to a comment that Gerry made in his presentation, which I think for me is probably the most important comment, you know, throughout during this symposium. That is, when they asked audiences said, "We want audio description when we want it," and I think we have to, as a sector, put more energy and effort into changing the way we think about audio description and the way we promote audio description, and look at how we can make audio description a personalized, on-demand thing for the individual, not for when a service provider or someone decides they can have it.
Great insight. Gen Z comment, kids are okay. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add to Bruce and Manisha's thoughts around mainstreaming?
No, I think they've covered it well. We're not there yet. I mean, every time my barber asks me what I do for a living, I just say in TV now, because I can't do the 5-minute explanation of what it actually is anymore, because it's just, yeah.
I have had many a conversation with politicians where for at least half an hour of the conversation, they've been talking about captioning while I've been talking about audio description. I think it's changing. I hope it's changing. I hope more people understand what this is now, particularly with SBS and ABC and the streaming platforms making it available. So I have my final question, which is about technology specifically, and then we'll open to the floor. And I know we have got someone from Free TV here who'd love to ask a question, but I'll just ask my last question. So looking at the current tech landscape in Australia, how do you envision audio description services evolving across the different platforms? So broadcast, TV, streaming, and online content in the next 5 years. Manisha, we'll start with you.
I can't answer how I envision it happening because I think that there are too many variables, but I can talk about what I'd like to have happen, which is it's, I guess, my aspiration rather than what will happen. I think that we obviously need audio description to be on all channels. I would love to be in a position where not only did we have audio description, but people were audio describing as they spoke as well. So for things like, Q&A or for news reports where people could get a sense of who was speaking when it was difficult, so that we actually didn't just have audio description as an add-on, but a bake-in terms of the way we communicate. So starting to communicate differently. would really add, I think, to the way we communicate in this country. So I would like that. I'd like it everywhere for everything, but I'd also like it, I was going to say everywhere, everything and all at once, but I'd also like it so that people could choose how they wanted to consume audio description as well. Because I know in my house, I like having captions on and I like having audio description pretty much whenever I watch anything. It definitely adds to my experience. However, that's not the same for the other people in my house. You know, sometimes they find it distracting. It doesn't, the noise gets to them or whatever it is, you know, everything all at once doesn't work for them. So I think we also need to have different ways of actually accessing information so that people can watch together. And whether that means everything is done from the broadcast itself or some of those other ways that are kind of complex because of syncing, but actually having different channels available, sometimes in your ears and sometimes through the set. All of those things I think would be great as well. And I'd also like, I know 5 years is probably not long enough, but I'd like to be in a position where actually these things are happening, that the conversation isn't about should we have audio description or shouldn't we have audio description. The conversation is actually around, you know, what are the gains we can make from audio description? What should it sound like? What should it do? I'm really heartened by some of the things we've heard, I think from the UK, where people who are blind and with low vision are actually doing the audio description scripting using, not by watching, but actually by reading the script. And they're finding that the way that they're describing is different to the way sighted people describe it. So I think that's a really interesting innovation as well when we think about with, not for. But that's what I'd like to see in the world.
Sounds amazing. Bruce, what would you like to happen?
I'd like what she's having, you know, in that I do think that a lot of the things that Manisha was talking about are things that I should happen, and I would certainly like to see happen. I would add to that. I think a way that we must explore of bringing personalized, customizable, on-demand audio description at an individual level is AI. Now, I know, and I'm the first to kind of come up with examples of where AI gets it completely wrong. But on the other hand, an increasing number of people, myself included, are using AI applications to describe photos, to describe videos. And the technology, you know, has arguably, you know, reached the limits of large language models. I mean, we need to look at the next thing. But if we want to embed audio description in the cultural DNA of the blind and low vision community, then I think we have to get more involved with making audio description customizable and bringing it down to the individual level. And if we don't do that, and this is where I think what will happen, if we don't find ways of doing that, then I don't think anything will happen. And in 5 years' time, we will still be having very similar conversations to the conversations that we're having today. And I certainly hope that that's not the case. But I think we as a sector, and this is going back to one of the comments that Lauren made about advocacy falling by the wayside, I think as a sector, we have a responsibility to envision where we want to go and to make sure that we can get there, and to be proactive in how we do that. And that I don't think that is just going to come from more advocacy of the type that we've had over the last 20 years, which has not got us. It's had some successes, but it's certainly not got us the comprehensive audio description that we've all been hoping for a long time. So I guess to summarize, I think we need to be leveraging new technologies such as AI to get us to a more individualized choice and control model of audio description.
Sounds amazing. And Kevin?
I think there's going to be a need for conformity, like a setting of standards similar to Richard's put when digital TV was emerging in Europe, the public service broadcasters got together to have a common technical standard and agree best practice. For example, MXF for metadata and EBUR 128 for loudness. So a similar thing should probably happen with AD, like a standardization. And Gerry's mentioned in the comments that they've repeatedly offered to share their experience and their learnings with the commercial broadcasters. So I think there's an opportunity for ABC and SBS and Red Bee Media to set the standard for what it's going to be in broadcast and on demand. In terms of AI, we currently use synth voice as for a limited sort of genre, generally documentaries, as a lower price point. It's faster for us, and it's just a way to sort of, as the voices are getting much, much better, it's not a distraction. It's allowing us to do more work, and it's allowing the broadcasters to get more bang for their buck. It's not ever going to be, for films or dramas, things where you need to have emotion, but it works for getting some basic content done at a quicker pace. Automated scripting, it might develop over the next 5 or 10 years. I think it will have a niche. It won't work for everything. It will certainly, it will be similar to what happens in the captioning field, which is you automate to a limited extent, and then you have a human element there to correct it. We'll see whether that's something that's going to come up in the future. And the last thing is that with on demand, someone else, I can't remember who, sorry, was mentioning the possibility of pausing content to create space for AD. And I think that what SBS is starting to do with their audio intro project is probably the best we're going to get in that regard, which is because it's on demand, you can have an episode 0, so it doesn't affect linear broadcast, and we can invest the time in fleshing out the characters, fleshing out the world, sort of give a prelude to the actual AD. So when they start episode 1, if there isn't time for characters to be described, we've already established that, we'll still do it in the AZ, obviously, but it'll be like a nice extra to have that, create space in a way that you can't really do with linear broadcast at the moment.
Well, can I just say, Katie, there was one part that we talked about right at the beginning was the regulation piece. I think in this 5 years, something has to happen in terms of regulation as well. And because the regulation we've got is old and clunky, let's face it, and it's all got bits stuck together on it in some ways. And it works for a world which was there before the streamers came on board as well. So while I do believe that, the free-to-air broadcasters should be embracing audio description, I also recognise that the environment and the regulation there's a mismatch in all of this as well. And I think in the next 5 years, this is the time now. We know enough now. We've got enough case studies. We also know what the market kind of looks like. Sure, it might get disrupted again, but we've got a pretty good sense of what's happening. That this is a good time to actually go, well, how do we ensure that we have a robust broadcast environment in Australia, that we have great Australian content, and we have an audio described?
A question that's been coming up for me lately in my circles is the Broadcasting Services Act the best legislative mechanism for us to focus on in this discussion of audio description, or are there other pieces of legislation that might be more effective? So, for example, the Disability Discrimination Act.
Well, that's right. There's all of that, and if what is the consequence? And what is the carrot? Like, not just what's the stick, but also what's the carrot, right? Like, so it's how do we actually make this something that works for people, that knowing that it isn't the easiest thing to put audio description onto our services, as Kevin has, so so nicely discussed, like it's not the easiest thing to do. Even with SBS and ABC, it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but they did, we did a pretty good job in a reasonably short amount of time as a start. So it's how do we do this in a way that works? How do we make sure it's not a checkbox? How do we make sure it's not held for ransom because there's so much else happening that people want funding for, that this becomes the easiest thing to hold for ransom? And how do we do it without, as a win-win rather than a win-lose?
I think if I just go back again to the comment that Lauren made about advocacy falling by the wayside, and I totally agree with that. I think one of the challenges we have, though, is that the range and complexity of issues that organisations such as Vision Australia, Blind Citizens Australia, Guide Dogs are having to advocate around is increasing. What do we say to someone, who says, look, I'm frightened to leave my house because I think I'm going to get hit by an e-scooter? Do we say, oh, that's all right, just stay home and we can watch audio description? But so I think we, as a sector, we have limited resources, limited energy, limited time, and an almost unlimited number of issues that we could advocate for. So I think when we're looking at things like legislative change, and I believe that ultimately legislation is the only thing that moves access and inclusion forward. We do have to consider what is achievable, what can we do, and I think in that context we should be looking at, well, we spent a lot of time, we spent years developing draft amendments to the Broadcasting Services Act, and it didn't get us, we didn't get them. So is that I think we do have to have a serious look at, is that the most effective? It looks like there's going to be an imminent review of the Disability Discrimination Act. Maybe that offers us more opportunities. But I think we have to sort of temper our aspirations with what we can realistically achieve and maximize the things that we can do to bring about those goals. Otherwise, it'll just be Groundhog Day for for an indefinite time.
Well, I want to thank this panel for their insights today. I think we have had a great conversation about advocacy, legislation, and technology, and what audience wants. And I just to go back to what Lauren Henley said at the beginning of today in her talk about the way to move forward is that we need to bring together the political will, the industry collaboration, and also sustain advocacy. And with that collaboration in mind, I'd like to invite Giles Tanner from Free TV Australia, who has joined us today and would like to make some comments in response to some of the ideas that were raised in this conversation. So Giles, if you could unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Katie. Look, I'm sorry, I actually I moved a little bit too slowly. I do apologise. I meant to just say something at the end of John Simpson's comments, which were really very modest. I am happy to make a slightly wider comment, which I will. But what I wanted to say to John was that I completely take all his points about capacity on digital television channels. The commercial TV industry is not currently arguing, I don't know what was argued in the past, but it is not currently arguing that there is a capacity problem that prevents it from introducing audio description. He's quite right. MPEG 4 does allow us a lot more capacity than we've had in the past, and most networks are now gradually realising those efficiencies, and the data requirements of audio description are very small. In fact, John then went on at the very end, very briefly, to acknowledge what is Free TV's position. And if I can paraphrase Bridget, and I hope I get this right, basically, the commercial television industry is not opposed to audio description. The issue is that, unlike the ABC and SBS, who've received funding to do it, it has a cost, and as yet, we haven't been given any undertakings around how that cost might actually be met. The cost varies a bit between broadcasters. Some is at the technical side. I think we've had some knowledge of that from Kevin. Different playout arrangements needed, implementation costs. Then there's the program sourcing costs. So there are real costs. And as you've invited me to make a more general comment, I'll just say this then. Look, it's really fantastic to be at a symposium where everybody recognises that free-to-air television, accountable to Australians, carrying reliable news, trusted news, information, entertainment, wanted sports, is actually a critical service and a critical vehicle for social inclusion for a large part of the Australian population. And I say that because when you're in a policy discussion, quite often that's not the mindset. It's quite often the mindset is, well, none of my kids watch free-to-air. I don't know when I last watched a free-to-air television program. Of course, it turns out that these policymakers usually have watched some TV programs they've just forgotten. And we know from our VOZ data that those very high cumulative audience figures that were cited in John Simpson's address, we know they're basically correct. We know that the TV industry still has a gigantic mass audience, particularly amongst older Australians, that are very, very heavily reliant on commercial and national television for information and entertainment. But there have been massive changes, and I think both Kevin and Manisha repeatedly recognise that in their comments, which I really appreciate. This is a different world from the world before 2015 and the world of 2005. It's a world when a lot of that revenue from what used to be so-called licenses to print money has moved to Google and Facebook. It's a world where broadcasters face a lot of ongoing fixed costs, but are frantically adapting to win audience and advertising share in an increasingly online world while keeping that digital platform going. So when I say that our objection to introducing it today, and our objection, I suppose, to simply regulating and saying, we'll just do it, is cost, we need a discussion. This needs to be part of a bigger discussion about how you retain a viable, sustainable, competitive Australian free-to-air television industry into the future, to 2030, to 2035. And the imposts you place on commercial TV, they have to be considered in the context of the other imposts that are placed on commercial TV and the other opportunities that are given to commercial TV. That's all I'd say. So, as I say, I set out to simply say to John, you can save a lot of that stuff about capacity. That's not really our concern. The issue really is that so far this has been we've not resolved this issue of the additional cost on top of various other issues which are in play, gambling, advertising restrictions, charges on our spectrum, reflecting the value of that spectrum to other industry sectors, and so on and so forth. That's the wider discussion, the wider policy discussion in which the introduction of any AD requirement would have to be considered. So I guess that's what I'd say, Katie. And thank you very much for what's been a really, really informative and useful symposium, which we will continue to be tracking and I hope participating constructively in going forward.
Thanks a lot, Giles. It's great to have your insight here too, and really exciting to hear that free TV is in support of audio description as a principle, and recognise that there are other issues at play here that we need to consider. I'm really interested in the issue you brought up about the changing context of the free-to-air television in broadcasting environment, and I wondered if, now we're looking outside Manisha's window. You're on mute, Manisha, so we can't hear you. I wondered if Bruce, Manisha, or Kevin wanted to respond to that concept around the broadcast television environment has changed in the last 7 years. Bruce, I think you're on mute as well.
Yeah, look, I'll open the batting. I was around when the ABC did the trial of audio description on its ABC One service in 2012, and I used to come home from work and I would get a glass of wine and I would, turn the television on and I would sit on the couch and I'd listen to an audio described program. I can't remember now what it was, but it was the first audio described program of the evening. And I would, drink my glass of generally red wine. And and really enjoy the audio descriptions. And a lot of other people who are blind, who have low vision, did similar things at the time. I don't, you know, at the risk of oversimplifying and making the lapsing into the error that Charles sort of mentioned. I don't watch free-to-air television much anymore. None of my friends watch it, and my lifestyle is totally different. So I don't come home from work and sit down and listen, you know, to have a glass of red wine and sit on the couch and do things. So I think because when I want audio description, I want it when I want it, not when a television channel or a theatre or or a museum tells me I can have it. So I think not only has the technological environment changed, so we now have streaming and on-demand services, but I think our relationship with technology has also changed, even if it's still the case that many people still watch free-to-air television. I think certainly for me and for all the people I know, both blind and sighted, how we think about free-to-air television, how we incorporate free-to-air television in our lives is very different. And I think that has to be reflected in how we think about audio description in that medium.
So, and I think it's also who thinks about who has the privilege of doing what I do, which is like you, Bruce, it's the personalization model, and who doesn't. And then whose voices do we get to hear as a result of that as well? So, I don't think broadcast is dead. I just think that we have to understand where broadcast has a role that no one else plays as well. And I think another thing though, just in response to this notion of where audio description sits in the list of challenges, I think that, look, there's nothing that you said there around all of the imposts of broadcast, the broadcast TV faces or the free-to-air TV faces to that point that I don't disagree with at all. However, I don't think it's the role of particularly civil society, disability society, to have to take all of that on board. I think it's the role of this community, and when I have that hat on, my disability hat on, to actually advocate for our needs. Because if we're always advocating for actually we understand what the middle ground is, the people who win are the people with the loudest voice, and they're not necessarily the people with the greatest need. And the example I tend to give is, look, imagine that you paid some money and you were building a house, and it was this awesome house, and you get to the house and it looks fantastic. And to build the house, they've had to, demolish a couple of rainforests, and they've had to do some other things, and they've had to also comply with fire regulation, and they've had to comply with building regulation. And you walk up and there's no front door. And the builder goes, there's no front door, but there's this awesome window next to you. And if you just climb over, you can get in pretty easily. And we haven't put in a door because actually it costs a lot more to put in a door. And we like the idea of a door, but however, we have all these other things we need to think about. So the door's got to give. Most people wouldn't be really happy with that. But we do that all the time when it comes to people with disability. And then we expect people with disability to then be grateful for what they get. And so I think that
Lost her again.
We've just lost Manisha again.
Oh, she was on a roll. Kelly, I don't know whether you can see the
I can see the questions, and I wanted to ask some of those. I noticed that we've got a Q&A field too. We'll just go back to Manisha to finish her thought, and then I'll ask the questions from the Q&A.
Thanks, Katie.
You're on mute, Manisha.
apologies, that's probably enough for me anyway. I think you get the vibe of the thing.
Okay. So I've noticed in the chat that there's a conversation going about Australian voice. And there's a question from Jackson Reynolds Ryan, who said, in terms of developing the voice of Australian AD, is this something that you think will just emerge over time, or should we, sorry, I need some reading glasses. Or should we actually be celebrating and promoting differences in styles? For example, the British style, the US style, but also distinguishing whether it has been developed through reading the script versus viewing the film or the show, and how much emotive versus descriptive language is used, and thinking about these as more like styles of directing films, for example, Fly on the Wall, noir, art house, etc. Can the finished products be marketed as featuring one type of audio description or another? Kevin?
Yes.
You.
Sure. I think it will just emerge over time. I don't think there's necessarily a need to market it as featuring one type or the other. I think probably the audience will get a feel for it. SBS has already done quite a bit in this regard. They've I think they just did a film called Hundreds of Beavers. There was a silent film about, it's like a pantomime comedy piece, and they worked with us to come up with the idea that let's do a David Attenborough style AD. Let's, you know, pretend that the audio describer is a kind of David Attenborough character, and take this semi-seriously to make the joke, you know, we're treating this seriously, but it's also a joke. And they've done a number of other, they did their erotic stories and a few other things where we look at what the content is, and it's like the old way of doing things would just be audio description. Now we're looking at things and thinking, you know, found footage is one of my favorite horror films. Like, what can we do with a found footage film that ordinarily would just be audio description? But it's like, well, hang on, how about we try and treat this as if this is actually real? You know, let's have the audio description maybe pretend that this really is found footage, you know, not just a quote unquote found footage film. I think the voice of Australian AD is not just, you know, emotive, but also we're a country of larrikins. You know, let's do something with AD that the other countries aren't going to do because they are too serious about it. Let's have fun with it. You know, it's accessible, but if the content calls for it, why don't we engage with the content more, you know, play with the content, so to speak. Yeah, that would be, I think it will just naturally develop over time. You know, we didn't start in 2000 with, oh, we're to 2020, sorry. We didn't start with, let's make an Australian style AD. It was just looking at what other countries are doing and thinking, there's a different way we can do this. Let's explore that. And that's just what's happened.
Bruce, what do you think? Is there an Australian voice for AD? Is this something that might emerge over time?
I think overall I agree with Kevin that it's something that will emerge over time, and that we shouldn't be seeking to proliferate difference just for the sake of proliferating difference. We have, in many areas of culture in Australia, kind of synthesized dialectic approaches from, say, the US and the UK, and we see the same thing, believe it or not, in Braille, where the Braille codes used in Australia, whilst they were traditionally British-based, gradually sort of took on aspects of American Braille usage. And there were differences between US and British, and British Braille in their whole philosophy. The idea was in Britain was that when you transcribe a book from print into Braille, you're trying to convey the author's intention, if you like, for Braille readers, whereas the American approach was you should be able to take a print book, transcribe it into Braille, and transcribe it back into print and end up with an identical print version. So the two print versions were identical. And so the idea in Britain was Braille was an autonomous script, and that's not the way it was in America. And I think that you know, in some ways we found similarities when you look at audio description. One of the examples that I give from time to time is when I went to the cinema and watched the Oliver Stone movie 9/11, and during the course of the movie, a relationship, you know, like an empathy developed between two characters who were waiting for their respective husbands to emerge from the rubble of 9/11. And the audio description described one character as light-skinned and the other one as dark-skinned. And of course, that wasn't the point. The point was that one character was white and the other one was black. And over the course of the movie, they developed a bond and a rapport. I was the only person in that cinema that didn't know that character was, you know, the difference in those characters. And yet there was audio description. So I think there are aspects of audio description like that that are more important than simply, you know, is this a particular voice, or is this not a, you know, not a particular voice? Not that that's not important, but I think, and I'm also a great believer in standards, and I've participated in many standards processes over the years. But I think we have to be careful that we, you know, there might be red herrings, but we have to be careful that we're not eaten by the red herrings in our quest for, you know, for standardization and some kind of uniqueness.
We've got a couple of comments in the chat. Nicola's interested in hearing about what work is happening in Australia to promote the Indigenous perspective and voices in audio description. And again, we can make a shout out to Alison Myers, PhD. She's looking into that, and I think stay tuned there to hear more. Will has made a comment that I think relates to something that Bruce just said about going and speaking to the audience, because he says it can be a red herring to consider audio description as being synonymous with blind access. And from his experience in theatre, experiences embedded in non-visual access are better explored, free from audio description, with taking users at the heart of the process. So from that, I think we again, reinforcing this idea that's come up a few times in the discussions today around ensuring we speak to audiences who are blind or have low vision about what they want, what they need. Alison's got two questions here, but before I go to Alison's questions,
I was going to say, Katie, I was going to say also, I think the interesting thing in that one is this notion of non-visual, that notion of non-visual access, and embedded non-visual access, not just being around hearing access. It could be other things as well, like tactile access. And I think that also Bruce's comment, which I'd not heard or considered before, but this idea of decolonizing audio description, what does that actually mean or look like, would be really interesting, just based on what Will has talked about here today.
Fran, again, people in the chat are wondering if you would like to share your insights around this issue of an Australian voice in audio description. Is Fran still with us, or has she left?
I'm still with you. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
I mean, I think an Australian voice will emerge if we push it. I mean, if we get Australian voices, and that's a multiplicity of voices on Australian content, and if that travels with the content, that's how we introduce ourselves to the world. That's how we reinforce our voices at home. And that means using Indigenous voices on Indigenous content and a variety of voices on a variety of content. And it means if we get to the point that Bruce was talking about, in the ideal world where there are options for the same piece of content, then people can choose the voice they prefer. And I guess that means people in the US can choose an American voice even on an Australian piece of content. But I'd like to think that now, if they're getting Australian content in the US, they're getting Australian description with that, because if they can cope with the content, they can cope with the local description. And I guess I I resent the fact that our stuff gets described again overseas, partly because it's a waste of effort, but which could be put to better use describing things that haven't been described before, but also because it's in keeping with the content. I mean, good AD is in keeping with the content, whether that's the vocabulary choice or the choice of voice. It shouldn't be something that's jarring. It shouldn't take the viewer out of the experience by being so different from the source that it draws attention to itself. So I feel like there should be as many Australian voices in AD as there are Australian pieces of content. And again, I think this goes back to getting the AD produced as part of the content creation, because then there is a greater measure of control that the content creators have over how their product is scripted and voiced for AD. It's going to be more of a match because it's going to be part of the product and it's going to travel with it. Yeah, that's my very basic take on it.
Thanks, Fran. Alison, did you want to unmute and ask your questions? There was one question around playfulness and another about standards.
Yeah, so we were talking about that kind of playful AD, and I'm just wondering, as Fran was saying, if we're going to get more playful in AD, how much input should the filmmakers have in that? I know SBS is doing interesting things with their productions and where they actually are getting the filmmakers involved. But what did you think about that, Kevin?
If the filmmakers would like to have input, I would always welcome it. I think a critic would say that once something's created, it's not theirs anymore. It's the audience's. So, it's up to us to interpret it, not as ADs, but just as the audience interpret their work. And they can't come in and say, no, you've misunderstood my point. It's like, no, you've created your work and I've interpreted it. And this is the reading that I had of it. So, release a director's commentary track. I don't know. But I think once something is at my desk and I have to create AD and make it accessible, and I want to be playful with it because it's worthy of being playful, or there's something interesting we can do that makes it both accessible and enjoyable, or more enjoyable, then that's our prerogative. Obviously point one is to be accessible. We don't ever want to be playful to the point of like distraction, but we were not quite shortlisted for a Hermes Award when we did a children's program that had a narrator speaking in rhyming meter. And so what we did was created AD that matched the meter. Obviously the goal was still to describe things, but we just flowed in with the narration. Is it better or worse? It's different, We didn't win an award for it, so I don't take that personally, but I think plus if we're dealing with The Longest Day, anyone who made this movie, they're dead. So it's how we want to create the AD for it, to be accessible. But if it's worth being playful, if it makes it better, can't hurt, I think.
I think Will McCroskey had his hand up. Will, did you have a comment you wanted to add to what Kevin just said? You can unmute.
There we go. Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, I actually hit that by accident, but why not? Let's talk about it. So just to drive the point home a little bit from the comment that I made about AD being treated as synonymous with blind access, I did a bit of research overseas in my time working in theatre and visited a number of companies that had experimented with embedded audio description in particular in theatrical productions. And to be honest, the ones that were focused on embedding audio description were almost universally either very limited successes or failures, as acknowledged by the people who did them. The things that were more successful were focused on embedding access. So they were releasing themselves from audio description and strictures and trying to place that voice inside the world of the experience, but instead just looked at working with audiences, working with the describers to identify the aspects of the show that were less accessible or completely inaccessible to the audience, and then coming up with novel strategies to fill that space using other methods and techniques. And that was pretty universally a much more successful approach rather than trying to find a place for the voice of audio description. So I just think there is value in reserving audio description, capital A, capital D, as a fairly standardized approach to making up for where media fails to make itself accessible, and then having space to do more flexible lateral explorations around accessibility outside of that. I think that that's a more productive approach.
Okay, Manisha, we've got literally 1 minute left. Would you like to make a 30-second comment on that?
What was the question, sorry?
Oh, just on Will's comments around looking at access broadly.
Yeah.
You've put in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. I think that this is the piece around being more nuanced, right? Like, it's not one size fits all. When we think about audio description, I think that we've all been very, very focused on audio description on television for 20 hours in a particular style and place. And I think the work Red Bee has been doing has been great in terms of how do we play within those boundaries. But what Will's talking about is also great. How do we think about audio description in a broader context and in broader ways? And what does it mean for access fundamentally if we don't get good access? I mean, and I also think Bruce's comment really plays into this, when you could have great audio description, but it actually doesn't do the job of audio description in terms of building inclusion, when the audio description doesn't describe the nuance, that political nuance. So now is the time, I think, to start looking at all these things and going, actually, well, in Australia, we might be behind the 8 ball in terms of audio description on TV, but maybe we can learn from these other things and actually look at access more broadly and the role of audio description in different ways there.
Thanks,
I
Manisha.
feel like I'm just repeating what kind of other people have said, so apologies.
Okay, well, now is a great time for sure for us to be talking about audio description, hopefully not repeating ourselves again and again. So I'll call this panel to a close now and thank Bruce, Kevin and Manisha for their participation, and all of you all in the audience today for sticking with us to the end. And I'll hand over to my colleague, the real Tama Lever, to wrap us up today.
I love that we have multiple options of Tamas. It doesn't happen very often. So I get the lovely task of wrapping up and thanking everyone involved today. And I just want to take a minute to say just how much I've enjoyed and valued the contributions from each of our speakers today. We started with Lauren Henley, who shared with us the story of her human rights complaint to the UN, only resolved really in 2022 with a recommendation that AD should be widely and permanently available on Australian television. This advocacy has led to significantly more AD in the Australian television landscape, but as Lauren notes, the fight continues to get the human right to participate in shared cultural life fully respected. Michelle Chu and Gerry Neustatl from the ABC shared the history of captioning and AD, which is considerably shorter than the 90 years that the ABC has been broadcasting. AD on Demand has presented particular challenges, provoking different ways of framing and experience aiding on digital platforms, but huge progress has been made. Gerry got bonus points for reminding us that the ABC's PSA announcing audio description includes a fart joke from Bluey. Kevin got to catch 'em all. Geldard from Red Bee Media gave us a wonderful history of AD coming out of the UK before it really had a significant hold in Australia. And only now it's been explained to me what the Red Bee actually means. So the pun on the BBC origins. I'm obviously a little bit slow today. Kevin's story of building a team during the pandemic was equal parts impressive and pun-filled, showcasing a clear love of popular culture references. John Simpson, AM, very much made the argument that AD has to transition from nice to have to a right to have. Far from being alienating, John made a strong case that new technologies, including AI, should be tested and applied to broaden AD production, especially on digital delivery platforms. He also powerfully argued that commercial broadcasters definitely have the capacity in their current bandwidth to include AD, since the public broadcasters can achieve it with the same capacity, notwithstanding Giles Tanner's reminder about the costs involved. Finally, in our panel discussion hosted by Katie Ellis, featuring Kevin, Nisha Amin and Bruce Maguire, they really zoomed in onto Australia's AD landscape, talking about regulation, challenges, opportunities, and really testing the boundaries of what future AD might actually look like. A through line in all of these presentations is the urgency to ensure that AD delivery in Australia is both maintained and expanded, making the most of the world of digital television and streaming. So thank you to all of our speakers. You were fantastic. Thank you also to the 40 people who were part of today's symposium. It's always heartening to see people's deep investment in Australian AD. And finally, can I thank our research team who made today possible? Mike Kent, Katie Ellis, and of course, our biggest shout out has to go to Catherine Locke, who did the lion's share of putting today together. You rock, Catherine. And we'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.